Identical twins. What happened when you were mistaken for your twin? My twin brother recommended a restaurant to me. Said that he and his wife went there all the time. Good food, really friendly staff. So, I took my wife there. Food was as advertised, but the service, somewhere between cold and openly hostile, like they resented our presence. I was puzzled by the contrast between what I'd heard and what I saw. Suddenly from the front of the restaurant there was an explosion of laughter and much rapid talking. Suddenly the waitress is there smiling and everything, just as my brother and his wife walk around the corner. So the restaurant thought my brother was cheating on his wife with some blonde. Yeah, it's funny now. Not a twin, I'm just Asian. Constantly asked about work projects I'm not involved in. Realize coworkers think that I'm just the other Asian guy. Oh god. In college I was working on a group project and randomly assigned teams. We had an Asian team member, and it was a pretty big class of about 60 students. During the first class, after being assigned groups, we broke up into our teams to begin planning, and I noticed that the Asian kid looked a bit lost. So I waved him over, figuring he'd got confused among all the moving around. Anyway, we began delegating out our work and responsibilities and exchanged contact info. Everything was going well until we were joined by our real Asian group member who was running late. At that point, pretty much everyone in the group busted out laughing. I went to a party once, and my bald identical twin bro had yet to arrive. His girlfriend was already there, so I gave her the obligatory friendly hug, then sat on the other side of the room to hang out. This other guy, a mutual friend of his and hers, kept staring at me, then staring at her, with this real nervous, what the frick look on his face. For about 15 minutes, every so often the guy would look around nervously and then furiously text on his phone. Then my brother arrives. He kisses his girlfriend and says hi to everyone, and the guy who had been staring at us just blew up. Jesus, was no one going to say anything? What the frick was that? I thought he grew a full head of hair in a day. Not me, but a coworker has 2 sets of twin daughters. A younger pair are identical and both work at the same McDonald's. The manager often puts one on the pay window and the other on the food window just to mess with customers. That's phenomenal. If only you could get just a couple more, maybe you could make people think that McDonald's had perfected human cloning. I only hope that right now some of the customers think that one staff member is sprinting around running the whole joint like a cartoon character. I'm not an identical twin, but I am married to one. When I was dating my wife, she and her twin sister had a bunch of friends over. I walked over to her and put my arm around her and she leaned into it. I leaned in for a kiss and she pulled away. I thought, well, maybe she's just not comfortable with a little peck in front of our friends, since we haven't been dating for too long. Then I scanned the room and made contact with my girlfriend. I looked back in awe that I had my arm around her sister, who was messing with me until things went too far. I then tucked my tail between my legs, walked over to my girlfriend, put my arm around her and said, well, will you give me a kiss? Smooth cover, right? My twin brother had a huge stash of adult magazines in his closet, and I always wondered where he got the money to buy them. One night I walked into a nearby convenience store with some friends, and the guy behind the counter threw me out. I had no idea why. When my friends asked, he told them he'd caught me stealing adult magazines the week before. I'm not a twin, but my brother and I look startlingly similar, even being almost 2 years apart. I've been ranted at by teachers, faculty, and other members in grade and high school for being in the wrong room, or this isn't your lunch schedule, or had people get furious that I didn't know what they were talking about for homework or sports practice or whatever. What takes the cake, though, is that I had leg surgery in high school, and someone called me out for faking my injury because he saw me at practice at night and in a wheelchair during the day. Don't flip out at somebody in a wheelchair at school. Seriously, who fakes broken legs to be cool? My twin had recently decided he didn't want to be alive anymore, and I was at a bar drinking away my rage, and a friend of his came up and flipped out at me, saying how awful of a prank it was, and took everything I had not to remove their teeth with my fist. My father is an identical twin. He was mistaken for my uncle while walking with a woman hand in hand down the street in London, England. The witness was a friend of my aunt's and immediately called her to accuse her husband of infidelity. She was at that moment sitting beside my uncle in Ontario, Canada. I was dating a girl in college. The first time I went to her house, she opened the door, I told her that I liked what she'd done to her hair and kissed her. She kissed me back, we went inside, and then she yells, "Your boyfriend's here," and walked away. They were weird girls. My brother and I dated twins way back in the day. They used to do crap like this to us all the time. Frickin' weird, you don't even know. I've been called my twin sister's name my whole life, so one day I accidentally introduced myself to someone as her. When I caught and corrected myself after, they thought I was straight up crazy for not knowing my own name. Oh boy, I dated one of two identical twins. They used to play pranks on me where they'd pretend to be the other one or switch places to test me. That all stopped when I walked up to the wrong one, grabbed onto her butt, and told her some of the very explicit things I planned for her booty later that night. Needless to say, one twin found it hysterical while the other less so. Pretty much for the following 3 years we dated, the other twin used to say, "Good night and guard your booty," every time we went to bed. When we were in the 6th grade, my brother decided he wanted to stay at home because he wasn't feeling well. So far, there had never been a day where only one of us was at school, but I didn't think anything of it. I was walking down the hall and all of a sudden I was pulled in by a teacher who I'd never seen before and she started yelling at me, and I mean yelling, because I'd skipped her class and I had the audacity to walk in front of it right after. It was really awkward to just say, I have an identical twin brother. My name is Joseph. She, of course, thought that I was making a terrible excuse, and I had to go get another teacher that knew I had a brother to come tell her that I was telling the truth. She never bothered me again. Other than that, we've never had a super embarrassing story. A friend and his wife went to the supermarket every week. His identical twin also goes there with his wife. One day, after summoning up the courage, the cashier pulls my friend's wife aside and says, "I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but I've seen your husband here several times with another woman." We were out with friends, and he decided to go to one of the back rooms which was set up for a private party with bottles of spirits everywhere. Well, he decided to take a bottle and run off. Cut to me in the club and some bouncers came up and took me to the back room saying, "You're screwed, mate. We saw you on camera stealing a bottle." Blah, blah, blah. I had absolutely no idea what he was talking about, and they thought I was just playing dumb to get away with it. "Yeah, nah, you can stop it, mate. We've got you on camera." Somehow I finally convinced them I had a twin, so they fished him out and eventually said we need to come back tomorrow to settle the damages. Well, obviously we weren't doing that. Fast forward to about 2 weeks after, I was staying at my girlfriend's mum's house and got woken up by her mum at 6 a.m. "Hey Mish, the police are here." What? I got arrested and put in the police car where my twin was already sitting. Interviews, long waiting, disappointing polystyrene lunches, and got off with a warning. Thanks, John. I have twin friends who went to separate high schools and switched places on April Fools. Not embarrassing, but totally worked. My friend said hi to his brother one morning. Well, it turns out his brother was actually his own reflection in a window. His mum witnessed this and has never let him live it down. I mean, considering how many times I've scared the hell out of myself by walking past a mirror, I think the parameters set by having a twin make something like this completely reasonable. My friend Daniel got caught tickling his pickle. He said he was his twin, Alex. Some girl decided to suggest that I date a guy that looked very, very much like me. Yes, those were her words. "There's this guy who looks so much like you, you two should get together." What's his name? Paul? "Yeah, you've met him?" "Yes, that's my brother." My father spent a year abroad before returning to enroll in the same college as his twin brother. The first few days were pretty standard. Acquaintances of my uncle mistaking my dad for him, business as usual. That is until one girl approached him, publicly mind you, and with a wink said, "You were really great last night. I gave your number to a few friends. I hope you don't mind." Naturally, my dad went from there to immediately seek out and congratulate his brother on his good fortune, and hopefully share some of the spoils. On the way, he found himself receiving a disproportionate level of sly smiles and sidelong glances from some of the groups he'd passed. By the time he finally found my uncle, he was thoroughly perplexed. Surely his brother couldn't have been this lucky. They were good-looking guys, but this was just ridiculous. My uncle flushed and faltered when confronted by my dad. He stammered and tiptoed around the issue before my dad finally got it out of him. How had he pleased so many women to establish this reputation? He hadn't. Turns out my uncle had spent all of his money in the first few weeks and had turned to desperate measures for cash. He had been working as an exotic dancer, mostly doing private parties, but naturally word had got around. So, for the rest of the year, my father had to contend with the fact that a good number of the people on campus had effectively seen him in the buck. Not a twin, but a mistaken identity. I was working at a local grocery store as a cashier. My next customer was a lady, maybe mid-30s. She walked through my line, looked at me and said, "When did you start working here?" About a year ago, I guess. "Does your dad know you work here?" "I sure hope so, since my mom works in the pharmacy." A look of pure shock ran across her face as she gasped, "Oh my god, I thought you were my son." I didn't know how to react and I just stared at her. "You look just like him. This is strange." Well, a little, since you're his mom, and I laughed. I never saw her alleged son to know if we looked that similar, and every time after that, she'd come to my line and call me Junior. That was when it got weird. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My twin's boyfriend tried to kiss me. I'm a straight man. Well, my friend Alex got caught tickling his pickle. He said he was his twin, Daniel. My grandmother was an identical twin. Her sister passed away before I was born. She didn't like to tell stories from when she was little, but she did tell me more than one mistaken identity story. She was in their bedroom one night when they were really young and saw her sister through the window. She started talking to her sister to see why she was outside at night. Then she realized it was her reflection. My grandmother had mistaken herself for a twin. One day I was looking through her photo albums and came across some pictures of her twin in her coffin. That picture haunted me until I actually had to see my grandmother in her coffin. What's strange from all these stories for me is how many people are clueless their friend has a twin sibling. I mean, of course you don't go around explaining to everyone that you're a twin. However, to go through school, where your twin also attends, and to have friends that know you pretty damn well, still not have any idea that you have a twin sibling? What's going on? I have two younger cousins who are identical twins. They grew up being the boys for pretty much all of their childhood, and they did everything together. They're a lot alike, so they'd always get mixed up, sometimes even by their parents. After hitting the teenage years, they both actively started wanting to separate, to the point that they had radically different haircuts. One has a man bun, for example, and they attended separate high schools. They're tired of being so closely associated. Because of that, they don't like to introduce themselves as twins, and I doubt they feel the desire to volunteer that information either. I'm sure this is the case for many other identical twins as well. I worked retail for a few years and had a lot of regular customers. This one girl would come in and she was awesome. She loved the product, always made conversation over what she was doing, what she had done, and we always connected. Sometimes she'd initiate the conversation, sometimes I would. Never really learned her name though, which is pretty embarrassing in sales. About a year and a half after knowing her, she walks in one day and I wave to her, she excitedly waves back. All of a sudden, a perfect frickin' clone in a similar outfit but different colors walks out from behind her. My jaw literally dropped. I was in disbelief. I'd been talking to two twin sisters, thinking they were the same person for over a year. When I asked why they never pointed it out to me, one goes, "Well, you just seemed to talk to me like you knew me, so I went with it." It was a surreal experience, honestly. I'm not a twin, but my boyfriend is. We were walking to class when a girl approached us. She confronted my boyfriend about why he stopped talking to her or hanging out with her. At first, it was extremely awkward for me, but I figured out what was going on and I laughed it off. Turns out she was a crazy girl that his brother once saw and talked to one time in their dorm laundry room and didn't talk again after that instance. A family friend was in the Air Force, and while in boot camp, she became mortal enemies with another woman who'd constantly try to one-up everyone and win any argument for whatever reason. Our friend found her sleeping around with some other officers a few years later and got her discharged from service because of it. 10 or so years after that, our friend's twin was walking around town on the opposite side of the country, and this woman barges across the street and starts berating her for ruining her life and all this other stuff. And the twin just laughed it off because she knew it was probably her sister's fault. It says a lot about the Air Force twin that the other one was so ready to believe that her sister was the cause of ruination in someone's life. I know that she could already assume that strangers who came at her claiming shared events that she didn't know about were in fact thinking of her sister, but to be ready to laugh rather than be shocked about something like this, it had to have happened before. My flatmate and I dated identical twins while in university. Nothing happened. No hijinks. If you're a twin, you're bound to eventually have a few embarrassing stories. My whole life has been a system of awkward hugs or ducking a kiss from a girl and yelling, "Wrong one, wrong one!" Your brother's girlfriend jumps in your lap while you're watching a movie? It happens. My personal favorite has to do with situations that have occurred due to mistaken identity with my brother now that he's a Marine officer. I joined the Peace Corps shortly after he became an officer. Yeah, we're a sitcom setup, and I worked as a teacher in Eastern Europe. Over drinks at a dinner during my service with friends of my host family, one of the gentlemen tells me that he used to be a Soviet helicopter pilot and asks me if I'd like to see his uniform. He brings down the full outfit in all of its medalled glory. We're almost exactly the same size and he lets me try it on. Thinking how cool this is, I post a picture online wearing it to show everyone. My brother calls me a few days later, angry as hell, because during his screening for security clearance, someone finds pictures of him wearing perfectly tailored Soviet regalia. He yells at me for getting brass up his butt and complains that he might get his clearance postponed. We still laugh about it. It was during those awkward middle school days, and my twin sister got her first boyfriend. We had our first 8th grade dance and thought it would be so funny to switch places with each other to see if her boyfriend noticed. He didn't and proceeded to go in for the big first kiss. That didn't go so well. They broke up and it was an emotional 2 weeks for my poor little twin. Oh, middle school. My 2 friends are twins, 1 boy, 1 girl. We rented a house in Wildwood, New Jersey after our senior prom. The girl twin brought her boyfriend and the boy twin brought his girlfriend. Me and the boy twin were sitting on the couch of the house when the girl twin's boyfriend came home from a run, leaned over the couch and gave the boy twin a kiss hello. He didn't realize what had happened until he stood up. It was hysterical to me because the twins resemble each other, but not enough to make that mistake. I was on a date for over an hour before she realized I wasn't my brother. My brother had been in a committed relationship for over a year, and the date just assumed he was on this date to cheat on her. A while back when I was in middle school, I went over to one of my good friend's house. His mum comes in, we start talking about random stuff, and then she asks my name. I'd known this woman for 5 or 6 years at this point, so I was kinda confused. The conversation continues for a very awkward minute or two, and then my friend's mum walked in as well. I didn't even know she had a sister until that day. My mum and aunt are identical twins, and my girlfriend's parents own the only restaurant in my small town, and they've told me how they thought my mother was having an affair. Also, I've got texts from friends that my mother was with another man. I send a picture of my uncle, and it's always him. Let me preface this by saying I'm a junkie, smack addict, and I'm still just sober now. It was 2008, I'd just got out of rehab and I was invited by my brother to join a gym he went to for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I was smoking a cigarette outside and a guy got aggressive with me and he told me to put it out or he'd choke me out. I felt threatened and I threw the cigarette at his eyes and got a cheap shot and knocked him out. Turns out he was a friend of my brother's who was a brown belt instructor at that gym. A good friend of mine is a twin. I only know one of the twins well, and I've spoken to the brother maybe twice in 15 years. My friend is the wild twin, and the brother is very laid back. I live in a big town of more than 100,000 people, with plenty of pubs and clubs. My friend ended up getting barred from most of them over a period of a few months, and then started drinking out of town. His twin didn't know how bad it was until he was out one night with his wife, and the bouncers let him in anywhere, much to his wife's fury. The twin tried to tell the bouncers, "It's not me, it's my twin." That didn't work at all. It eventually was settled when he rang his brother, made him come into town, and went around every bar to the bouncers to prove that he wasn't the banned twin. They took note of his ID, kept the ban on my pal, and let his twin go on enjoying his night. One bouncer joked with them both and said he had heard that story hundreds of times and never thought he'd see the day where it was true. Yes, I love telling twin stories. When I used to live at home with my parents and sister, I was blow-drying my hair in our bathroom. I was in my bra and undies because God, it gets hot in there, and I'd just gotten out of the shower. I cracked the door an inch to get air. I was busy drying and I see my sister's boyfriend coming into the bathroom. He wasn't over before, and I was like, hey? And when I turn, he freaks because he thought it was my sister. He was at the door waiting until my sister noticed him, which backfired, because it obviously wasn't her, it was me. It was more embarrassing for him because he felt bad. It was an honest mistake. Other times I'll be out and about and people will come up and hug me out of nowhere. I love the hugs, but it's more embarrassing for the person when they realize I'm not my sister. I don't think it's a big deal, but they're always so apologetic. My brother and I both entered into the science fair. Before the awards ceremony, he got sick, so I went with just my mum. My brother won first place, and I didn't place at all. When they called his name, my mum made me go up for him. I stood on a stage, looked out at the sea of friends and teachers clapping for me while a medal was hung over my shoulders and a certificate was shoved into my hands. In the moment, I should have felt proud of my brother, but instead I just started crying on stage and weirded everyone out. I think they must have thought I was just overwhelmed with happiness, because even when I stepped off the stage and made a beeline for the back door, people continued to congratulate me and try to shake my hand. It was such a bizarre emotion, like a blend of jealousy and shame. I walked straight to the back, past my mum, and left. In middle school, we had 2 boys everyone knew were identical twins. At lunch, twin A had been arguing with this group of boys talking crap just to rile them up. Afterwards, they went down the hall towards his locker wanting to kick his butt. While they were on the warpath, twin B just happened to turn the corner and run into that group of boys, completely oblivious about what had just happened at lunch because they had different class schedules. Twin B got his butt kicked for his twin's actions, not knowing the reason behind it. What happened when you ignored the "don't try this at home" warning? When I was about 10, I folded myself into the sleeper sofa with the help of my cousin. Here's why this is an incredibly bad idea. You can't breathe. You can't move. You can shout for help, but your cries for it will travel at the best 5 feet because your mouth is smothered by a mattress. The spring mechanism, in combination with your weight, will make it nearly impossible for someone to pull the mattress back out unless they're very strong or you're very light. My cousin had to run upstairs to get a grown-up to flip the sofa on its side so I could roll out. If I did this stunt while I was by myself, I probably would have suffocated very quickly. Do you remember lawn darts? My group of friends made our own rules. 2 teams, one in the front yard, one in the back. One member of each team on the side lawn from where you could see both teams at the same time. We only had one dart, we'd lost the others in a game of woods darts. The goal was to rifle that one fricking dart over the house and make a member of the other team, rightfully afraid for their life, move out of the way of said dart. And 1 point if you made them move. -1 point if it landed within arm's reach and they didn't move. The game lasted until someone's parents came home and were horrified when they saw what we were doing. The 80s were a simpler, bloodier time. Me and my friend decided to golf off of each other when we were about 14. The initial idea was to drive off the tea that was in our mouth, but then common sense kicked in and we decided against it. But still wanting to go through with something, we decided to do it with our butt cheeks. Ugh. I went first as the hitter, and it went way better than I expected. I lined that crap up and drove it as far as I could, while still caring for my friend's buttocks' safety. Not a scratch on him, so I was ready to be hit off. I laid down on my stomach and put the tee in place, and my friend lined his shot up and goes all in for his swing. He follows through and puts the driver right into my butt cheeks, and at that moment it felt like everything I once knew was wrong, and my butt was freaking hurting like heck, but that's besides the point. Listen to the advisory, kids. Wait, you say that there's an advisory, but never in my life have I seen a warning or had an instructor tell me not to do this. You know what did tell me not to do this? My goddamn common sense. Dry ice and a little bit of water in a plastic bottle. Bad idea. The bottle expanded but didn't explode. We basically had an armed bomb laying on a soccer field next to a playground. We had to make it explode somehow, so my dad took a long stick and hit it a couple of times. The bottle finally exploded and my dad heard ringing in his ears for about a year. We didn't find any traces of the bottle. My brother and I got the bright idea to see what happens if you put one of those CO2 cartridges used for BB weapons into a fireplace. Long story short, the resulting explosion filled most of the main floor of the house with flying chunks of burning wood. My mum was not amused. Split a cucumber by throwing knives at it. My friends and I were putting stuff in the microwave. Apparently, eggs not only explode, but they're hot as fricking napalm. I decided to make my own fireworks. Apparently, potassium nitrate, or stump remover, and sugar mixed together make for a pretty good smoke bomb. The way you make it is you mix the 2 ingredients together and put it in a pan over a small flame. The heat melts the 2 together into a chocolatey brown goo. If you put that goo into a cardboard toilet paper roll and stick a wick in there, you have a pretty big smoke bomb. The first time I did it, we had a lot of fun smoking out an entire park. Then I decided we needed to go bigger. This is America after all. So I doubled the ingredients and started cooking it on my stove. Stupid me forgot that the video said medium to low heat and I had the burner on high. Halfway through cooking it, the heat caught the mixture on fire and started going crazy. I got my brother out of the house and dumped water on the mixture. For the next 2 hours, you couldn't go into my house because the smoke was so thick you couldn't see more than 2 feet in front of you. My parents were furious at first because the ceiling was burned, the countertops charred, and the floor was even melted a bit. Then once they got the insurance money, their attitude changed completely. The insurance covered the ceiling, all of our cabinets, and a couple of the countertops that were burned. The stove was melted and even the dishwasher caught some damage. We're very thrifty and the do-it-yourself kind of people. We bought all of our appliances second-hand, even the cabinets, and with the money we saved we bought the raw material for the marble countertops and put it in ourselves. We also tiled the floor ourselves. We still had some money left over, so we bought a nice granite table at the flea market. People don't realize what you can accomplish by learning to do things on your own and going to flea markets and Craigslist. So we now have a brand new kitchen that's way nicer than our last one. In short, made bootleg fireworks, destroyed my kitchen, and now we eat off marble and granite. I had the great idea to fire some fireworks inside my house. You can try it at home, but I wouldn't recommend it. It was fun though. I was told not to try making small firecrackers at home. I still have all 9 of my fingers, and I had fun too. Probably every wrestling move on my brothers in 2000 and 2001. Sometimes it went wrong and hurting them, like powerbombing them on the wooden edge of the bed. My brother and I made thermite in high school and melted a GameCube, among other things, with it. I feel like Adam Savage and Jamie Heineman told us not to try that at home at least once. My friends and I recently used our pool skimmer to have a pole vaulting tournament as seen on a nationwide commercial. The fact that the idea came from an insurance commercial should have been enough to deter us. We ended up vaulting all the way to the far end of the pool, and I smashed my feet into the wall. Besides 2 sprained ankles, everyone else was fine. The pool skimmer worked really well as a vaulting pole. When I was about 10, I jumped off my 15-foot deck with an umbrella. Yeah, don't try that. I tried to rebuild the paper crossbow from Mythbusters along with many other things from that show. Royal Rumble in the back garden. 4-on-4. I fly-kicked my cousin into the wall, cracked his head open, goes to the hospital and gets stitches. A few years later, he tried pushing me into the pool. I pulled him in with me and his chin caught the edge. More stitches. We don't talk much these days. I put orange juice in a soda stream and tried to carbonate it. It had a warning specifically saying not to do that. I read said warning. I'm usually not the kind of person who ignores warnings, but this didn't seem like it would be an issue. I thought it was because the carbonator tube would get sticky and clog, but I thought that I could clean it. Nope, that's not why. It's because it fricking explodes. I was finding sticky spots for months. An 8-year-old me, unsupervised, heard the term electromagnet on TV. Smart as I was, I assumed the rest and proceeded to take a magnet, tape 2 wires to it, and stick the ends in a socket while holding said contraption in my hands. 220 volts AC passing through the human body is definitely a bit more than a mild inconvenience. Received a jolt that I remember clearly to this day. Burned the socket board, tripped the mains, and learned a lesson for life. I'm glad that I wasn't eliminated from the gene pool that day. When I was about 10 or 11, my friends and I used to imitate Jackass, but our show was called Dumb Idiots. I was the biggest one out of all of us, so I took the brunt of the damage. One of the dumbest things we did was have me stand on an office chair and another of my friends drop-kick it. I ended up falling face first onto the floor. I wasn't too injured, but it hurt. I'm fairly certain that every group of idiot teen boys has tried to be Jackass at some point. I know mine did. We got lucky, and the footage was lame anyway. The warning at the beginning of that show was seen and ignored by us. Kids are just dumb. I hit a basketball-sized hornet's nest with a baseball bat. Much stinging, much pain. So you know those parkour videos? I tried doing some of that when I was 12. I jumped from a bench onto a small wall and landed on my belly. Ugh, that was painful. I couldn't breathe and my thighs hit the edge, so I couldn't walk either. But I looked cool, right? I was staying at my friend Ben's house, who was a bit of a latchkey kid. The movie Daredevil had just come out and I was maybe 12. It was 2 in the morning and we were busy skating around the front of the house, annoying the frick out of his neighbors. I got the awesome idea that we should light the skate rail we had on fire, just like in Daredevil. So I grabbed a can of gasoline that was sitting in his garage and proceeded to coat the rail with it. After coating the rail with gasoline, I lit the gas and it was a little bit lackluster. I figured, let's just throw some more gas on that thing. So I did. The gas trickling out of the can caught fire and the can exploded in my hand. Luckily, my reflexes saved my butt and I let go of the can just as the flame hit. Ben's lawn was completely aflame. I just walked inside and didn't do anything about it because I didn't want to get into trouble. In short, tried to be Ben Affleck, lit my friend's lawn on fire. I never ignored the "don't try this at home," but I did frequently visit sites where I had to confirm I was 18 plus all throughout my teens. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I cringe whenever I remember this. When I was 12 or 13, the movie Jackass was really popular with my friends, and we'd watch it almost daily. We thought they were so cool and funny for doing stupid stuff for the sake of a laugh. Well, we'd tried to recreate some of the stupid gigs they performed. One day, while my mum took my friends and me to the grocery store, my friends convinced me to pull a prank on some poor guy shopping. I grabbed a huge pack of toilet paper, walked right up behind this dude and threw the TP at his back. He turned around and screamed at me, a little nerdy 12-year-old girl in glasses, and walked away. I've never been more mortified, and since then, from that day on, I decided Jackass was really, really dumb and immature. I tried to make a potato launcher out of PVC pipe one summer day. The guy on the YouTube video said not to try it at home without adult supervision, but of course, at the ripe age of 15, I wasn't going to let that stop me. So I went to the garage and gathered up all of the required materials. My parents probably wouldn't notice a bunch of PVC and their sack of potatoes missing anyways, and proceeded to build my masterpiece. I figured that just having it shoot straight would be kinda lame, so I decided to pseudo-mod it by cutting a slit into the edge of the PVC cap to act as a sort of scope. The thing is, I forgot to shave off the ends that were stuck on the barrel and proceeded to fire off my first round. I ended up getting potato bits everywhere in my garage and almost cut my arm open on a flying piece of PVC. Remember, kids, do not do this at home is a valid warning. I launched bottle rockets out of my buddy's ear gauges. Saw the warning saying not to try it at home, so I went to my neighbor's house and did it there instead. My brother and I would play WWE with some of our friends as kids, and my brother would never let anyone win, so one day he came after me when I had one of the championships. I forgot to say that he had the other two belts. So he and I had a match, and at one point I decided to go for a powerbomb. I couldn't lift him up all the way and dropped him on the air conditioner accidentally. He was on the ground, lying in the fetal position in a puddle of water, so I went for the pin, and the jerk put his arm up. I remember the kids that were doing commentary screaming out of shock. I waited for him to get up and went for a super kick, and I missed, and he pushed me into the bottom left corner of the window, and that piece broke and I got a cut on my forehead. I wanted to cry so bad, but he tackled me into the wall, put me on the bed, and did a rock bottom from the bed onto the floor. He pushed me off the goddamn bed. He pinned me and won my damn cardboard belt. He held all titles in our little wrestling group at the time, and I still hate him for it. I drank antifreeze on purpose. It's both spicy and sweet at the same time. Not in a Chinese food kind of way, in a chemical reaction on your tongue kind of way. It's delicious, and if you taste it, you'll understand why animals and children will drink it. Not recommended. You know, because of the horrible poisoning effect. So I wore a baseball hat a little too much, and I had this huge clogged foreskin kind of thing on my forehead. It looked like a pencil eraser smack dab in the middle of my forehead. I had it for 2 months with no change. I researched online and found out that with a bottle of Jack Daniels and a few friends, I could use wart freeze-off and might have some luck getting it off. I told my doctor and she laughed in my face. She said, "Good luck with that, let me know how it works out." I took that as a challenge, and just to make sure, I verified there was no major facial nerves that I might accidentally freeze. In the end, it did work better than I thought. I essentially killed all of the cell tissue and it fell off and healed up fine. 10 out of 10 would do it again. To be honest, the narrator was absolutely holding out for one of these that actually went perfectly fine. You should still listen to warnings and consult professionals, audience. But yeah, every once in a while, one of us idiots who tries something dumb will walk away unscathed. I sabered a bottle of champagne and it was pretty epic. I was around 3 or 4 and my sister was about 2, and after watching Barbie Swan Lake before bed, we decided to imitate the scene where Odette jumps the waterfall in the bedroom we shared. Me being the eldest, naturally I went first, jumping from our windowsill onto our bedroom floor. I landed it and felt like a boss, and then came my baby sister's turn. She broke her leg trying to copy me. Needless to say, she can't remember much, although myself and my parents have fond memories of her running around the garden with a neon pink cast. She now claims she got her revenge by pushing me off my scooter when I was 8 and she was 6, and I broke both bones in my arm that time. Unfortunately, I can remember that a lot more and spent a holiday abroad in a bright orange cast. I arrived at a party maybe 15 minutes after they put on Beer Fest in the background. This was right after it came out on DVD. I said I'll try to drink with them. People told me, "Don't do that," they literally had a warning saying not to do exactly that. Punched a hole in the wall, woke up my mother from spewing so loud and crapping my pants. Not sure if there's ever been a "don't try this at home" warning for this particular thing, but it certainly qualifies as something stupid. Now, to set the scene, a bunch of mates and I go camping every year. It's a pretty awesome weekend and we get up to all sorts of stuff. Well, this year, in our drunken wisdom, we decided to shake the hell out of a can of beer, bury it, and then build the fire pit on top. Don't ask me why, we're idiots. So, cut to a few hours later, we've all completely forgotten about our little time bomb ticking away and are all sat around having a good time when the mother of all explosions takes place. We've had the campfire down to a couple of coals for cooking, thankfully, so when the can went off, it only launched dirt, ash, and coal around us, as opposed to what would have happened had we built it up roaring like usual. For about 10 seconds afterwards, it felt like a lot longer, I'm sitting on my butt, dazed and confused, looking around, ears ringing as ash and dust gently tumbles down into the campsite. It felt like a scene out of a war movie. No one was injured and we all have a pretty awesome story to tell now. Still wouldn't recommend anyone tries it at home, though someone most likely will. I ate toilet paper after watching Strange Addictions because she made it look so delicious. My friend had access to dry ice our sophomore year of college from his research gig. We filled water bottles with dry ice and some water and kept them, throwing them and watching them blow up in mounds of Buffalo, New York snow. One of them didn't detonate per se, so I decided to defuse it, instead of detonating as some stranger walks by, and it went off in my hand. Miraculously, nothing more than a few scrapes on my hand and 30 minutes of being deaf in my right ear. I almost made a friend go to the ER while playing WWE. When I was around 11, I started asking my parents and all the other adults I knew if I could have their old electronics to disassemble for fun. All of them thought this was the typical kid disassembles and then reassembles a printer kind of thing that my dad had already done with me several times. Nope, I had blueprints. Very poorly drawn because I was 11. They were for a number of devices I wanted to build. I'd read up on Wikipedia and my dad's old EE textbooks to figure out what materials I needed to build a cutting laser, a microwave flamethrower, an arc welder, and a few other things I've forgotten over the years. As the broken electronics filtered in, computers from the early 90s, defunct DVD players, among others, I slowly acquired all the parts I needed. My mother figured out what I was up to and stopped me shortly before I was about to extract the capacitor from the broken microwave. She was afraid of how much charge the capacitor would store, and it turned out, given my poor grounding safety practices, I likely would have fried myself. Turns out my dad's old textbooks hadn't explained the potential health ramifications for electricity, and for all the math I could do, I was still an idiot. The other, less dangerous stuff would have still been awesome, but I was banned from messing with electronics until I left for college a couple of years later. I have a ton of stories. I wanted to be a stuntman growing up, and my all-time idol was Evel Knievel. Before I knew Parlor existed, I was into jumping from roof to roof at my grandma's house. The houses weren't too far apart. One day I was climbing up to my training area, which used the gate and the side of the wall, and then I slipped and fell and fractured my tailbone. I also received one of those rockets that you launch and it comes down on its little parachute, and my friends and I wondered what would happen if one of us got shot by it. So we took turns shooting at it and each other using a pipe to aim it in our general direction. We were wearing our four-wheeling helmets and safety goggles for safety, and my friend got hit square in the head and survived our amazing stunt. We also tried building an underground base using an old camper shell as a roof, and charged kids money to jump their bikes and whatever over our area of operations if we were in it. I think that was the stupidest thing we really did. Some kid took his dad's four-wheeler and tried to jump over us while we were laying down in it, and it almost crushed us. We were about 9 to 12 years old, and the neighborhood kids would make us feel like rock stars when we rolled on by in our Huffies. Anything they did on gladiators, or at least the best approximation a bunch of 8-year-old kids can construct between themselves. Used a crap ton of tannerite on a giant propane tank that apparently had some propane left in it. I have roughly 40% hearing in my left ear and 60% in my right, and degrading because of this. My idiot cousin shot it before I was in the trench and had my hearing protection on. I got thrown into the hole and couldn't hear for days because of the shockwave. His brother got thrown into the hole and was in a medically induced coma for a few days to try to stop brain damage. He's okay, but not 100% anymore. My idiot cousin lost several teeth when I knocked him out a week later in Retaliation. He then lost some more when his brother beat the crap out of him too. What's the creepiest thing you've experienced out of nowhere? I was walking down the street when I saw a rusty nail in the road. I picked it up and threw it into an empty house's yard. That's not helpful, I know, but after I threw the nail, a man came out of what I thought was an empty house and shouted at me. I freaked out, thinking it was about the nail, and I kept walking towards my house. The guy didn't sound mad, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. He started following me onto the street and gesturing for me to come over, but my gut told me to keep on walking. I got home and see from my house the empty house is now surrounded by cops. At this point, I still think it's about the nail. After a while, it gets worse and men in full gear show up. I found out later that the house was indeed empty, the men inside were known criminals, and I very much almost ended up a hostage. I dodged the frick out of that bullet. While cutting lawns along this bike trail, me and a coworker found a mostly decayed, severed from the knee down leg. The cops were called, they questioned us, and we never found out any more about what happened. Pretty creepy. That is creepy. I really wish the police would offer some kind of closure for the people who report crimes like this. Years ago, in the early 90s, my boyfriend was driving me home and we saw a man lying on the ground in the strangest position, kneeling with his head on the ground and bent at a sharp angle so that he faced the street. It was 2 a.m. and the man was covered in sweat with his eyes open. We pulled over and I hopped out of the car to check on this guy. His eyes were wide open and he seemed like his face wasn't moving, but it really felt like he was pleading for help. He didn't respond at all when called out to. No blinking, just glassy eyes. I reached out to touch him and he was ice cold. I'm sure he wasn't breathing. This was before cell phones, so I hopped back in the car and we sped back to my house to call 911. 10 minutes later, the police called back to ask for the cross streets again. Apparently they arrived at the corner and there was nothing there. I verified that they had the right spot and they said they'd call back if they needed any more information. That was the last I ever heard about it. I checked the newspaper for the next few weeks, but we never found out anything else about that man. Yeah, that one would haunt me for decades to come, and evidently our author has been thinking about it since then. I do wonder what would have happened if you had the tech necessary to call the cops and remain at this guy's side. Would you have witnessed a sudden recovery? A kidnapping by his attackers? Spooky. I worked from 2 p.m. through 11 p.m. at a gas station in one of the nicer cities around here, and I had a gentleman look me in the eyes and ask if I'm enjoying my last day on Earth. They walked away before I could answer. Power plant worker here. During shutdown, the large main steam valves tripped shut, and the subsequent water and steam hammer to the main lines was so intense, the pipes literally jumped a few feet. I thought that place was coming down around me. The sound and shaking was so violent. Like, check my pants scary. We're talking about steam temperature and pressure that can instantly flash the entire building if there's a branch, cooking everyone inside. Even a pinhole leak has the power to cut a person in half. Seriously scary crap when things don't go right. The summer after I graduated from high school, I left work early and went up to my parents' cabin in northern Michigan. I spent that night at the beach watching the sunset. Once the sun went down and it became nearly pitch black, because there's no light pollution, I got to my car and started driving down the highway, M22. After about 10 seconds of being at speed, there was an older Tahoe from the late 90s that started riding my butt and flashing its high beams. So I got up to about 60 in a 45 lane, and they were still on my tail. I pulled off to the side of the road that my parents' cabin is off of, and they took the same turn. I thought this seemed weird because there's only about 30 to 40 homes on that road, so I went all the way to the end, which is usually a dead end, but leads to a maintenance area for the golf course nearby. The truck was still following me. At this point, I was freaking out because if I pull into the house, they'd know where we lived, and they were still following close behind us. I took a ton of random turns, and the truck kept following every single turn for about 15 minutes. I finally had a chance to make a turn with traffic going through the intersection that gave me a few seconds of head start. I pulled down a side street, went up 100 yards, turned off all of my lights and waited. The truck slowly drove by the perpendicular street and kept going. I booked it home, pulled my car around the side from the main road, and pulled every curtain. For an 18-year-old, I was scared as heck that night. I worked for Radio Shack back in the late 90s, and I was scheduled to open on a Saturday morning. I go into the door, lock up behind me, and go to the back to get things ready, only to see my boss sitting at the chair in the back with his tie around his neck and tied up to an inventory rack with his pants around his ankles. That's the day I started drinking heavily. I often visit Walmart in the wee hours of the morning. One time I went in at about 2 a.m. and noticed an elderly gentleman asleep on one of the mobility scooters at the entrance. When I left about 20 minutes later, he was still there. I thought it was a little odd no one from the store had woken him up, but whatever. I found out the next day he had died and spent the better part of a day on display as a corpse at the entrance to Walmart. My 3-year-old, who's normally very happy-go-lucky, was extremely concerned the other day. He kept looking around the room talking about the rhino. Who knows what a 3-year-old might translate as a rhino? This went on for about 20 minutes. He was very concerned and looking around the entire time. So we got to a point where he says the rhino is moving. My wife asks where the rhino is. He's coming to Daddy. Yeah, so I'm Daddy, and my butt puckered just a little bit at that moment. Fast forward about 4 days to last night, and the same kid starts talking about the ghost. My daughter asks my son, where is the ghost? And he says, he's biting Daddy. What the actual frick? I was ambling down an old country highway in northwest Georgia on my motorcycle, a 750 Vulcan, when I spotted an ambulance coming the opposite way. I pulled over, and a pickup truck pulled over behind me. In my rearview mirror, I see the passenger get out with a baseball bat and start hustling my way. I didn't even look, I just dropped it into gear and hauled butt. What followed was the most harrowing experience I've had in my life as this pickup truck proceeds to chase me all over the place for about 20 minutes. I'm unfamiliar with the area and my bike wasn't meant for going fast around turns, so I've got no room for error and it's all I can do to stay in front of these guys. I'm blowing through four-way intersections in a bid to get some distance and come up with a plan, but they're all hell-bent on catching me. I finally managed to get pointed towards the highway and into the cover of other cars, but then traffic stops on a bridge. The truck is 3 cars behind me, and I'm thinking if I can just get out to the highway, I'm probably home free because my Vulcan can go fairly fast in a straight line. In my mirrors, I see that the passenger is snaking through the cars on the bridge, so I lane split, which is illegal in Georgia, and make the on-ramp. I hammer down, and I'm gone, baby, gone. Never went back to that town. As far as I know, this was an unprovoked attack of the hillbilly variety, because prior to the ambulance, I hadn't even seen another vehicle. I don't ride particularly fast, and I don't believe in loud pipes. I got lucky as heck seeing him come up behind me like that. I wonder if he wanted your bike or what the goal was there. I mean, was he just going to go into a protracted beatdown with the possibility of other cars coming by? Honestly, you were probably praying to be pulled over by a cop during that entire chase. Our old house was on a corner, and in lieu of a backyard, it had a side yard with a small deck that was wrapped around the back. The dining room had patio doors that led out to the back, and we'd have barbecues and such back there. When I was about 14, we only had one desktop computer and one laptop for the family. My brother and I would fight over the desktop, that's where Diablo 2 was installed, so I'd use the laptop to write music. On one particular night, my brother had a friend over, and they were downstairs doing whatever, and I was at the dining room table on the laptop. As I was wrapping up in my writing, I didn't pay much attention to my surroundings. I heard a knock on the patio door, which startled me. I looked up, expecting my brother or his friend. The basement had a door that led to the back deck, so I thought maybe they were coming in. Standing at the door and waving was a person of indeterminate gender or age wearing a Halloween pig mask. Thinking it was my brother or his friend, I mouthed, "Good one," and gave the person the finger, and they walked away. As soon as they left, I went downstairs to give them crap, and to my surprise and dismay, they were both sitting on the couch playing PlayStation. They swore up and down it wasn't either one of them, and I knew there was no way one of them would have had time to get downstairs and unmask before getting on the couch. To this day, I have no idea who it was that knocked and waved. In short, a creepy mother effer in a mask knocked on my patio door and waved. It wasn't anyone I knew. I cocktail waited on a day shift at a small casino in Idaho for about 6 months during a bad time in my life. So basically everything sucked there, but especially this one guy, not very old either I'd guess, in his mid to late 50s, who had a stroke at a nickel slot machine. He crapped himself but then dragged himself back to keep playing while EMS was on the way. I was out to lunch in Midtown Atlanta with some coworkers. We sat out on the patio. There are some high-rise condos right across the street. Some guy jumped from his 40th floor balcony and splattered all over the roof of someone's Jetta. Everything went everywhere. The noise was pretty memorable as well. We noped out of there before ordering. It was a very silent ride back to work. One of my coworkers said he won't sit out on patios anymore while eating.
You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe.
I was working in an office pretty late. I'm 100% sure I was the only one there. The AC system shuts down at like 7 p.m, and until it does, you won't notice how much noise it's actually making. The office then got extremely quiet, which is unsettling to begin with, and I had my office door closed. About 30 minutes later, I hear the muted voice of a little girl with a heavy British accent saying, "Mummy, I think he's in this one." Note that I live in the American South, so there's no good reason for a British child to be there. I almost crapped my pants as the door cracked open ever so slightly until a real live little girl popped her head in and says, "Oh, no, sorry, wrong one." It turns out her American stepfather was still in the building. 18 years old and first time ever operating a dozer with an open air cab and roll cage. I was clearing trees out of a waterway on a farm. All of a sudden, I'm knocked out. I come to and blood is running down my face into my lap. Dozer is pushing up against a tree, just spinning its tracks. My head and neck hurt. I thought I'd been shot or something. No idea. There's nobody around me. I wasn't told how to shut off the dozer as it was an older 6C. You don't just turn the key off. I called my dad and he runs over and pulls the idle bar all the way down and it shuts off. We're both clueless as to what happens when he sees a branch behind my head that must have driven through the window and pushed it pretty far, and it snapped back into the cab and hit me in the forehead. Never saw it or anything. I once found the corpse of a coworker. The guy just didn't come into work one day. He didn't call, he was very reliable, lived alone, and didn't have many friends outside of work. So I went over to his place and convinced his landlady to let me in. I found a body in his armchair in front of the TV. Heart attack. He had been dead for about 12 hours at that point. 25 years later, and I still remember the grimace of pain permanently etched on his dead face like it was yesterday. I used to work at a tanning salon, and one day while I was alone during my early morning shift, I heard what sounded like a full-grown man running down the hallway. I looked and there was nothing. Just me. No machines were on yet, no one else was in the building. I sat in the office until my coworker arrived. You know what, for all the awful and disfiguring things that can happen in a tanning salon, not least that awful scene in one of the Final Destination movies, I'm happy enough that this was all that happened to you. I once worked as a live-in staff member in a college dorm. During the summer, we housed the few summer school students who remained on campus, nearly 30 of them. It may be significant to point out these students tended towards the highly academically motivated, oftentimes high-stress students, even if they were quiet. One warm day in late June, my office received a call from a concerned sibling that she and her family were unable to reach her brother who lived by himself in a room on the summer school floor. This wasn't unusual, as our office frequently dealt with students avoiding their kith and kin due to frayed nerves or general social awkwardness. Our normal protocol to check in on a student is to try and reach them by our emergency contact information. Failing that, go check their room to verify they're living in the building and perhaps available then and there, and then have them call their family to verify that we followed up on the original request. Also, we're to only enter a room with another staff member present to ensure personal safety of staff and students. I failed to reach the student on his room and mobile phone and was working short-staffed, so since I was on my own, I decided to pop up to his room and check on him. I arrived at his floor at about 2 in the afternoon, and the floor seemed deserted as I'd expected. I found his room number and immediately noticed the sound of a movie playing on a TV or computer from behind the door. I knocked 3 times and announced that I was a staff member checking on his health and safety. No answer. I didn't think this was that remarkable. College students are notorious for leaving electronics running while not in the room. I checked the floor showers and bathrooms and found them deserted. I returned to his door and knocked 3 more times, waiting 20 seconds between each knock. No answer. This is when my instincts started to buzz. I worked in residence halls a number of years as a professional, and something about all the pieces of this puzzle just weren't adding up. Family concerned about his health and safety, electronics running, someone must have started them recently within the time frame of a movie runtime, summer school students and their idiosyncratic behavior. Something just wasn't right. I was by myself, so I probably let myself get more worked up than if I was with someone else. A deserted dorm floor, even at 2 in the afternoon, oftentimes evokes Kubrickian memories of the Overlook Hotel. I decided that for some sense of closure or sanity, I needed the immediate resolution of keying into the student's room, even though I was by myself and not technically supposed to do so. I knocked on the door 1 more time for good measure, again announced myself as the hall director, then keyed into the room and my spider sense went off even stronger. The room appeared relatively vacant. The student appeared to be living out of a suitcase, which is unusual for someone staying no less than 8 weeks for a summer school session. The bedding was tousled like someone had been sleeping in it, and all the lights in the room were on. As I'd suspected, there was an open laptop on his desk running on battery power, playing The Matrix, but no student. I began to start rationalizing to keep from feeling unsettled. Surely this student and I had crossed paths on my way to his room before. I'd never met him, so I wouldn't recognize him otherwise. And maybe he was just down in the lobby picking up delivery food or a late lunch. Sure, that's it. Then I turned to leave, planning on trying to reach the student later in the afternoon or that night. As I turned to leave, I noticed another odd piece of evidence: the accordion closet doors. These are generally removed in most rooms due to disuse, particularly single rooms like this, and they were still in his room, and they were closed. Odd. I couldn't remember the last time I saw someone actually use these cranky, dysfunctional doors. Then my intuition spiked higher than ever. Crap. I realized I was alone in a room with a potentially self-deleted student who may in fact have completed just that process. And I'm about to be that guy who discovers the body and then has a crap ton of paperwork and undesirable tasks, not the least of which would be calling the family back to break the news. I felt like I was talking to myself when my voice cracked as I spoke to the closed doors and announced my name and title and that I'd be opening those accordion doors in 3 seconds. I fumbled with the latch on the doors and finally managed to get them disengaged, and as I slid the doors apart, I was unprepared. I didn't know what I really expected. Something hanging there, a bullet wound. I'll tell you what I didn't expect. A 7-foot, dark-skinned Indian man staring at me embarrassingly as though I'd found his secret hangout. We stared at each other for a good 15 seconds without blinking, breathing, or speaking. I finally realized what was going on, and my natural emotion was disbelief. All I could think of to say was, are you in here hiding from me? He looked at me and said, yeah. My heart was still racing. I turned to leave, and before I shut his door, I turned back to him and said, call your sister, she's worried about you, and frankly, I am too. In short, I met an Indian in the cupboard. Literally. Scared the crap out of me. You know what? I think I would have screamed no matter whether the person on the other side was alive or not. Honestly, the lead-up and suspense dictated I'd be screaming at the highest pitch I'm capable of. Glad the guy was okay. When I was 17 and worked in retail as a cashier, I had a very old couple come through my line buying a wok. The husband, who was at least 85, started making conversations with me about the wok and asked if I liked Chinese food. Yeah, I like Chinese. Do you want to go out with me to get some Chinese? He winks at me. No, sir. Oh, well. He looked a bit disappointed and turned to look at his wife, who was on the phone with someone. Would you at least like to come home with me and live in my basement? No. The rest of the transaction took place in terrified silence. His wife never said a word. I wonder to this day if he was trying to joke because he sounded so sincere, or if he was suffering from dementia or something else that made him not realize how creepy that sounds to someone young enough to be your great-grandchild. I'm a teacher of adult students, and one student of mine is kind of intense and creepy. Actually, she's based at another school but specifically started attending classes at my school after meeting me. When I first started, she started giving me welcome presents as I was new to the country. Just simple things like food, postcards, and books, which was a nice idea but seemed a little excessive. She added me on social media and then got upset when I didn't reply to her constant messages. I told her that I don't really use social media. Anyway, I didn't see her for a few months and figured that she had just gone back to her own school or stopped studying or whatever, and was relieved that she had clearly got bored of me. But then last week she comes in and gives me an envelope full of photos of me during lessons that she had taken, without me knowing. I was a little weirded out, to say the least. I wouldn't worry about me too much though. The girl's creepy, but she's just young, in her 20s, and interested in the foreign teacher. No restraining order necessary. This is China, and I get a lot of weird attention for being foreign here. This just happens to be one of the more standout cases. That being said, if you don't hear from me in 24 hours, well, you know what happened. Hearing music that isn't actually playing from the store speakers, it's quiet, but it's there. Given the crap I was dealing with at the time, I'm fine writing it off as hallucinations or delusion. I work in a supermarket in the early shift, and part of my job is changing the shelf labels for the price changes each day. Just this last Wednesday gone, I was putting new labels on a shelf of hand soap when, about 2 feet along the shelf from me, a bottle shot off and landed in the middle of the aisle. I looked along the aisle at my colleague and she just shrugs her shoulder and says, happens all the time. I never directly witnessed anything else, but being one of the first on the shop floor each day, I'm now questioning all of the items that I see sitting in the aisles first thing, and guessing that I can't blame untidy customers for all of them. What's life's biggest trap that people fall into? The sunk cost fallacy. Just because you've spent a certain amount of time or energy or money on something, it doesn't mean you need to stick with it forever. If you're really unhappy in a relationship, don't stay in it just because you've spent the last 10 years with that person. If you're miserable at work and there's no happiness in sight, don't stay just because you'd put too much time and energy into it. I know a couple of people in debt because they have this mentality when it comes to gambling. If they lose $1,000, they'll gamble another $1,000 to try and win it back with, since they feel they've invested so much already. Of course, they lose again and feel compelled to gamble another $2,000 to break even. At some point, you've just got to count your losses and move on. Getting married to the wrong person at the wrong age out of sheer fear of staying alone. I don't know that it's the biggest trap, but definitely procrastination is a massive one. A lot of people think it's funny or joke about being procrastinators, usually along with stories of a clutch, last-minute scramble that somehow worked. I'm one of those people. Even if those stories are fun, there's a less fun side to procrastination. It's when there are no deadlines, no due dates, but you tell yourself that you'll do it tomorrow every day. That you'll learn a language, talk to your parents, get a degree, whatever. Then one day, for whatever reason, it's too late and you just feel regret. Don't procrastinate. It'll catch up with you eventually. Cultural or social pressure to get married before you're ready to be married. I have 2 groups of friends who married in their early 20s. One of those groups dated for 3 or 4 years after high school and realized that they'd already built the foundations of their lives together, so they got married after college. They have a home, a child, and a goofy cat. The other group dated for a year or 2 after high school and got pregnant by accident. Family pressure, religious pressure, and societal pressure made them cave and get married when they were about 22 or 23 years old. They divorced before the child was born, they absolutely hate each other, and blame each other for ruining the other's life, and their child is stuck in the middle of it. The narrator lost touch with almost all of his high school friends over the years, but yeah, a couple did get hitched. There's a lot of Schrodinger's marriages to check back into sometime to see which of those groups they fit into. Sales. Just because something is on sale, it doesn't mean you're saving money, especially if you wouldn't have bought it otherwise. Think of it not as saving 50%, but spending 50%, for example. I don't know if this counts as a trap, but having the mindset ingrained into you, starting from childhood, that you have to be friends with everyone you meet. I try to be friends with everyone, but after a while of getting to know them, I decide they're not really the kind of people I want as a friend. Thinking that you have to achieve everything. People think that they have to be motivated to do something. They get a burst of motivation to start something, and then they never finish it. Thousands of hours or dollars flushed into something waiting on their inspiration that'll never get finished. If I recall correctly, Stephen King forces himself to write 4 to 6 hours a day. That always inspired me to tread through the hard parts. Anyone can start something. Lifestyle inflation. A friend of mine just lost his job due to corporate resizing. He worked at the same company for 8 years and built up a very hefty variable monthly income from sales commission while his base pay barely increased. His lifestyle got inflated over the 8 years, living in a nice condo, driving a Volvo SUV, they're expensive here in Asia, 2 kids, and told his wife to leave her job to focus on the kids. Now he's out of a job with more loans than he can manage and with career capital that's been stagnant for the past 8 years. Oh, the biggest trap? It's Reddit, hands down. Failing to move beyond your past. I've seen this everywhere I go, and certainly in my extended family over the years. Basically, depending on who you are, but for many of us, life punches you in the mouth. Past issues and injustice like the shortcomings of one's parents, growing up poor, failed marriages, or even feeling like you failed your own children are examples of what can keep people completely stuck in their tracks if they can't let go of the pain. Many uncles and aunts who are substance addicts, poor, alone, among other things, all share the one thing: the inability to reconcile problems from their past, stemming mostly from fractured relationships with their parents and severe poverty sometimes. My cousins who have the same issues, 2 out of 3 were born with learning disabilities and never moved beyond the feeling that they were dumb and didn't belong in a classroom. Neither of them graduated high school. Many of us have been hurt, born into bad situations, whatever. One characteristic that makes some people more successful than others in this situation is the ability to let go of their pain. If you won't do it, you can't find the inspiration and drive you'll need to achieve personal success. Caring what some jerk thinks about you. I feel like people rush into marriages and kids because society tells you that that's the natural course your life must take, and then people end up with a mortgage and kids and feel miserable. I pretty much decided that I'm 27, I don't want kids, and if I get married at some point, great. But it really removed a lot of stress from my life. I can focus on things I actually want to do now. When I was pregnant, I'd have women constantly say how they haven't gotten there yet, and they'd act like their life was some kind of failure. I'd tell them that not everyone is on the same path or timeline. The woman I recall talking to was traveling the world. I thought that was a great way to spend a life. Not everyone has to settle down by getting married or finding a permanent residence and raising kids. Staying in their comfort zone rather than extending themselves to try new things and grow as a person. They stop trying as soon as something gets hard. The idea that you need all this crap to be happy. Consumerism can be killer. In my opinion, there's no real plan for anyone. I'm not talking about religion, but the pressure people put on themselves is incredible. I've got to graduate college by this year. I've got to have a house at this age. Life is full of so many different people, stories, places, and things. Take the pressure off of yourself and enjoy it. College. It's not really for everyone, and if it's not, then why go into so much debt? The whole situation largely happened because people saw that if you've got a degree, you were pretty much guaranteed a good job. But they failed to understand why that was true at the time and instead came to the naive conclusion that if everyone got a degree, then everyone would have a better job. But college degrees back then netted better jobs in part because they were relatively rare and in part because the better jobs that were available really did benefit from or need more education from those that filled them, which meant an ever-increasing number of people going to college without a clear career desire to fit a degree to, which destroyed both of those things. There are also problems with inflated requirements and a loss of respect for people in low education jobs that are still an honest day's work. To be honest, it's wild how many of us found this out after our multi-$1,000 5-year investments. Oh well, at least most of us partied it right up and had some good memories. Looking for short-term solutions instead of committing to long-term investments. Any sort of investment in yourself, whether it's career, health, education, salary appreciations, etc., takes years of hard work. So many people go from short-term solution to short-term solution for years, never making any progress. From one crash diet to another, from one get-rich scheme to the next, then they get old, they've accomplished nothing, become bitter and blame everyone else. If you're willing to put in hard work and be consistent about it, you'll have well-paying jobs, you'll fix whatever issues you have, and be in good health. Taking life too seriously. You have to surrender to it after a while. The happiest people I've come across are so open and vocal about their vulnerabilities and problems. The most unhappy ones are constantly competitive. They think admitting weakness is a failure. They think contentment is a lack of ambition or a laid-back attitude. Just be brave and soldier on. Thinking that potential is in any way important. You don't get points for half-finished projects, and ideas are cheap. Things you have the potential to do are meaningless unless and until you actually do them, and until you actually do them, you don't get to brag. The guy sitting in Starbucks on his MacBook, writing the same 10 opening pages of his novel over and over again without ever making it to page 11 is kidding himself. Don't be that guy. Actually finish things, then either move on to the next project or try and edit the last one to make it better. Complacency when it comes to money. You work hard for your wages, but how hard do they work for you? If it all goes to minimum payments and gas, you're never going to get anywhere. It can really suck to make it happen, but getting out of debt and actually building a savings account is such a good feeling. People make fun of my old car and my small apartment in one breath, and in the next, they're freaking out about what'll happen if they lose their job tomorrow. Meanwhile, my husband and I can put away enough for the future and fun things, help support our extended family, donate to charity, and still have enough to go out to a movie and dinner every week. We still don't have a ton in savings, but I make enough at my $2 above minimum wage job to support us if my husband loses his, on top of the 6 months' wages we have in savings. It's all because we ignored common sense advice about money. Agreed. I drive an old and kinda crappy car and I have a small one-bedroom, kinda far from things. My coworkers have nicer apartments and better cars, but then they insist I must be rich when I take long weekends in Reykjavik. Automated bill paying is really convenient, but it definitely robs a lot of people of understanding exactly how much they blow on things that they don't need.
You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe.
I think the biggest trap is when the money you're earning is just enough to live semi-comfortably, but the time it takes to earn it is also stopping you from improving yourself. Around here, 2 incomes at $14 an hour, 40-hour weeks, is enough to live rather comfortably in a middle-class area, but never enough to do anything fun or really have a family. It's a trap because I can earn less or quit entirely. At least then I'll be able to get a skill set or education that pays better. However, at the time it would be quite painful overall, so people get trapped by refusing the pain and never making the gains. Spending money that you don't have to buy things that you don't need to impress people that you don't like. The script? Go to college, get a job, get married, have kids, retire, die. Aside from that final step, all the other ones are optional. Do what you want. You don't need to go to college to have a good career, you don't owe it to society to get married, you don't owe it to your family to have kids, and you don't owe it to yourself to retire. It's your life, live it how you want. Thinking that moon-sized battle stations are non-operational. The stuff that makes you feel the best, substances, booze, and food that's bad for you, will kill you prematurely. Consumerism, allowing themselves to be manipulated by advertising and marketing into thinking that they're just one product short of happiness. Facebook, it's nothing short but advertisements, videos with advertisements, news from untrustworthy sources, crappy conspiracy theories people come up with while on the crapper, but every once in a while you'll see someone's cute cat or dog. I've been Facebook and Instagram free for a month and I don't plan on ever going back. It feels like I have my life back again. Why does it seem like there are only people who obsessively use Facebook all the time for that stupid crap, or people who've sworn off it and won't touch it? I rarely bother with my newsfeed, but it's a nice way to chat to friends and organize events. There's a middle ground where it's a really useful tool. I've got no idea why so many people struggle to find it. overextending yourself on a mortgage. Real estate is such a volatile market, and before you know it, you owe more than your house is worth. The American dream can quickly turn into the American nightmare. 1. Debt. The worst thing you can get into in your 20s. If you instead save and invest, you'll avoid major troubles in your life. And 2. Spending time fighting and arguing with nasty people. Just let it go. It's not worth it. The narrator has been much happier with his life since he just stopped dealing with people who clearly just want to have an argument. Devil's advocates and party debaters are just so fricking annoying. Thinking, I have plenty of time left. In the worst case, you die tomorrow, no matter how old you are. It can be a car crash at 16, bursting aneurysm at 30, or getting shot at 55. Or the second equally scary alternative, you grow old and are then too old to do the stuff you told yourself you would do one day. Travel the world when you retire, catch a common illness like heart disease, and nope, there's 1,000 things you suddenly can't do. Oh, come on, this is a bit extreme. Actually, the worst case scenario is that you die right now. I know so many people who just get locked into work, go home, eat, sleep, repeat. Day in, day out. Their weekends or days off, they're busying themselves doing housework, shopping, and then it's back to work again. They become more and more miserable, but somehow they just can't see it. I try to tell people, you need to do something random at least once a week, something out of your routine. You'd be amazed at how little it inconveniences you. I myself find that routine creep happens from time to time. That you think, this has to be done though. I really have to sometimes will myself to just go, you know what, I'm just going to go to the movies. It takes a few hours out of your day at most, and it rejuvenates you, even if it's a crap movie. Homeowners associations. They're usually not worth the money you're forced to sink into them every year. I don't know about other parts of the country, but where I live, if you don't pay your HOA dues, even if you're current on your mortgage, the HOA can seize your house and kick you out. Living everywhere but the present. Focusing on your own looks and other people's looks as the most important characteristics of a person. Way too much effort is spent on makeup, hair, and dressing just the right way, and then taking and posting selfies. I mean, presentation is everything to people you don't know. If you look well-groomed and wear good clothing, you come across as someone who gives a crap about themselves compared to the guy in shorts and flip-flops. This makes many interactions in life easier. People who don't know you take your word more seriously. That's just my 2 cents, though. You don't have to spend boatloads of bucks to look good, but looking good is worth investing into. The most amazing one to me is when people get stuck in their hometown. Working a 9-to-5 that they hate to pay for stuff that they really don't need. Letting normal dictate how you live. Don't want a desk job? Great! Do something you love and you're good at. You don't want to get married? Alright, then don't. A piece of paper means nothing if you're not being honest and happy. Don't want to go to college? Then don't. Get out there and work. See point A. Experience life and put your time towards something you're proud of. The older we get, the faster time flies, so spend it wisely. Never stop doing things that light your eyes up. Starting college right after high school, especially when the young adults don't know what they want to do. I'm not talking about stellar individuals with a goal in mind. Many young adults need to get out and see what they want to do. I know far too many of them jumping from major to major and never finishing college. They end up with debt instead of a career. Assuming everything will work out for the best. This is a guy's advice for a guy. Maybe it works for women too, but it wouldn't surprise me if it didn't. Thinking you have to live the dream your parents, society, or anyone else has planned for you. It's not their life, it's yours, and what you do should only be about what you desire or want. Waiting for someone or your dreams to happen. You must make your dreams happen. No one else will do it because no one else cares as much as you do. Nobody will ever tap you on the shoulder and say, "It's your time, it's your turn now." Never. Make it happy if you really want it. Thinking you have to prove something to someone else. It might be an old girlfriend or boyfriend who dumped you, but you still hold a flame for. It might be that best friend who put you down when you least expected or needed it. If you only achieve X, then they'll think of you differently, is what you're thinking. The fact is, they don't actually care, nor do they remember that you didn't measure up as you imagine that they think they do. Thinking that people are judging you. Mostly, people don't judge you unless they've explicitly told you they're doing so. Mostly, people don't care about you and they're actually ignoring you, not actively shunning you. You are an object to them. Thinking that other people's opinions of you really mean you are what they say you are. Okay, if a friend says you really need to know this because you're hurting yourself, then take their opinion under advisement. But in other cases, the best thing is not to give them the satisfaction to confirm their opinions. Who says they have any legitimacy? This is especially if it hurts you deeply. Don't invest more emotional energy into a situation than it really deserves. That applies to new relationships. Take it slow. That applies to road rages while driving. Take a deep breath. And that applies to bullies. Laugh them off, roll your eyes, or ignore them. You might see a pattern to what I'm saying. Never mistake for malice what is actually pure indifference. And don't forget indifference can work for you as well. Believing anything anybody says on the internet, especially when all of the comments are written by 20-something-year-olds who think they have life all figured out, giving bad advice. Substances. Crappy communities make it seem like the only option, but it's not. That you have to have a big wedding ceremony with a giant dress, tons of expensive food, flowers, photographer, catering. All of that is nice and all, but maybe I'd like to get married to the person I love without putting myself in $50,000 of debt. Yeah, a house deposit for a big party does seem a bit far-fetched, doesn't it? No matter how much you love the person, I still think eloping is the best option. Thinking that you can't rebuild your life from your mistakes. Almost 4 years ago, I got a DUI and evicted from my apartment shortly after. I had no direction and was a single parent of a damn great kid. I didn't think that I'd be able to fix this. I decided to get my act together bit by bit, budgeted my money and paid down my debts. Went to school through a university online while working 2 jobs. After my license was given back, I learned not to use the booze to numb my feelings and to never drive inebriated. Ever. I now have a wonderful job in my field where I'm licensed and a second one for extra money. Just leased a new car. Bills are paid, credit went up, damn great kid is still great. Family's respect is renewed. And I have an amazing significant other who watched me rebuild and supported me, and I know that he's the one. I promise you can build back from your rock bottom. Don't get stuck in that thought trap. Personifying things like society, the economy, identity groups, it's a useful mental shortcut for getting a quick and very basic grasp of complicated things, but it leads to really stupid conclusions when people forget that the map is not the territory. It causes people to imply intentionality where there is none. It assumes an ability to coordinate mass action in unrealistic ways. It also causes people to assume groups are much more monolithic than they actually are. Not exercising or eating right. Easy to fall into, and it happens. Just don't do it for too long, like years. I stopped running and eating right 9 months ago, ruined my body, and now I'm chubby and gross. The biggest trap is not working on your brain. People live their whole lives saying to themselves, nothing's going to change, this is who I am. Mostly they do it out of laziness because changing for the better takes work. What did you do to get your boss fired? Management was giving an injured worker a whole bunch of crap, not wanting to pay him, accusing him of gold bricking. The worker said, "Tell you what, do the right thing here or you'll be sorry." Management said, "Take your best shot." The worker called the EPA and the APCD and told them where to find the logs that showed discrepancies in toxic material storage and usage. The sheriff's deputies showed up and raided the offices. Field supervisors from 10 years ago that had retired got subpoenaed. It was epic. It cost the company massively in fines and remediation, all because they wanted to mess with one poor employee. Not my story, but my mother's. I watched on the sidelines as a teenager. My mother's job was basically a professional fundraiser. I don't really know what else to call it. People came to her to help raise money for non-profits or other foundations that needed it. This was a long time ago, before social workers were more of a mandatory thing at high schools. My high school was very poor and didn't have one, so my mother took it upon herself to set up a fundraiser to pay the salary of a social worker so my high school could have one. After raising all the money, she went to talk to the principal, who flat out refused to take any of it and said the position just wasn't necessary. My mother was pretty upset and just decided that she'd donate the money to supplies or something like that. I honestly have no idea what she did with it, but it did go to some sort of charity. After a few months, at a Christmas party, the superintendent of all the public schools in the area was at the same party, and he struck up a conversation with my mother. After some small talk, my mother said it was such a shame that the principal didn't take the money for the social worker position. The superintendent was dumbstruck and then told her that he'd ordered the principal to find funding for that position, and when superintendent asked him about it, he replied with, "No one's interested in that and we just couldn't get the money for it." Needless to say, the principal lost his position, and whenever we came back from the holiday break, the school was hiring for his position. Not fired, but transferred. Had a squad leader make us all stand out in the Missouri winter, soaking wet until someone volunteered for weekend duty. I told him I had a previous cold weather injury, frostbite, and he ignored it. The corporal saw my blue feet when I took off my boots and sent me to the aid station. The doctor lost his crap, and that squad leader was in another company the next day. It's not as satisfying as getting someone fired, but it's the army, so that's not going to happen. And I'm guessing you were the hero of your squad for the foreseeable future. Just a shame he likely went on to injure another company with his neglect. I got my boss disbarred. He was an attorney who was a serial unspeakable act offender of female clients and criminal defendants. He got away with it for over 20 years and preyed upon at least 12 different victims. The Office of Attorney Regulation censured him multiple times for other offenses, like being late to pay his annual bar fees, but even though they knew about at least 5 of the victims, they wouldn't disbar him. I discovered that the Office of Attorney Regulation decides whether to pursue an action against an attorney based on a cost-benefit analysis. I gathered as much documentation of everything as I could over a 6-month period. Goodbye. Advanced through the company through hard work and dedication and slowly began to usurp the boss's duties and responsibilities. Eventually, the owner realized what a lazy schmuck the old boss was and laid him off. A week later, I got a new title and a 35% raise. I worked the register at a tour company. I also had a manager who frickin' hated me for some reason. She was probably the angriest person I've ever met. Constantly yelled at us for no reason, got on to me about answering questions a new hire had when I was asked, not her, and wrote down that I was 30 minutes late for a shift when I was 2 minutes late, among other things. We had a sneaking suspicion that she was taking money from the tills, as she was always the one who counted down the till when someone got fired for stealing cash. I made it a habit to count down every bill when I gave it back to a customer because we'd get pay-docked if we were even $1 off. So if a customer had $23 and change, I'd count 20, 1, 2, 3 in front of them, so I knew I'd given the right amount back. We also had cameras pointing at the registers. Well, one day my GM pulls me aside and says $20 was missing from my till and they're going to fire me. I straight up told my boss she could look at the cameras because I counted out all of my bills for customers. Lo and behold, the witchy witch was the one who counted down my till and got caught on tape pocketing the money. She was gone by my next shift. F you, Jennifer, I won. Mine is pedestrian, but very satisfying. I was working in a garden center. I'd been there a long time and was woefully overqualified for the job I'd been doing and was therefore very valuable in that position. Think ops manager skills at admin assistant position and pay. We lost our sales manager one year and corporate hired a new one. Let's call her Flora. She was a real piece of work. I don't know what her interview looked like, but in person she was instantly and constantly rude and strident and mean and curt and dismissive, and that attention-seeking brand of lazy where she threw her weight around without cause, talked crap about anyone not in the room, and collected 75% of the credit for 5% of the work. She had some knowledge, I guess, but it's way easier to teach a competent manager how to grow flowers than it is to teach a jerk horticulturalist how to be a human being. Anyway, for whatever reason, corporate loved her, so she stayed. What with one thing and another, I got another job. This process was slightly accelerated by Flora, but only a little bit. I'd been looking for some time, mostly waiting for the right opportunity. When I gave my 2 weeks' notice, I got an email the next day scheduling my exit interview with the head of HR. Now, my position didn't get exit interviews, only managers and sometimes department supervisors did. And everyone at my store knew why I was leaving, so there was literally no reason for the store manager to pull strings to get me one. And he never said anything about it. But I knew he set it up so I could tell the head of HR, a man I was very friendly with, that I was leaving because of Flora. And I did. I just laid into her. I said that Flora was the only reason I was leaving after almost 10 years with the company, during which time I wrote the company's health and safety program, trained almost every person who did my job at other stores, made spreadsheets that got used company-wide, as well as setting audit records that still stand to this day, and all for a few pennies over minimum wage. I said I was going because she was the worst and I couldn't take it anymore. I found out later that she was let go. I was thanked by most of my old workmates. My manager never said a word about it to me, then or since. He was a real OG. I used to work at a title company and witnessed our department manager forge mortgage documents on a regular basis. So when she went to upper management to throw the entire department under the bus for being behind on recording documents, I marched straight to HR to resign and let them know what she was doing. She was fired and they called me and offered me my job back before the week was out. It was a better environment for a while, but then it got bad again. I moved on and I work in healthcare now and I'm much happier. For a while, I was a project manager who got moved around from project to project as a fixer. I was moved to a project where the customer just couldn't be satisfied, no matter how many people, how much attention, or how we bent over for them. Our program's director, who should have been our advocate, would not manage the customer, and instead just hammered his employees to do more. People on our team were being let go due to failure or quitting outright due to burnout, and he was complaining that he couldn't get good people. Because of my sort of special position as a general dog's body, I happened to have the ear of our VP, and this project came up in casual conversation. I mentioned that it seemed funny that if the director was doing his job, how so many employees that we knew by fact and reputation were good employees had failed. A week later, I heard the director had been let go, and nothing of value was lost. I got mine fired by doing so much myself that it started an investigation into what my boss was actually doing during their day. Officially, she was fired for sending undressed pictures through corporate email, but the only reason they were tracking her email was to understand what she was spending her time on. Turns out, it was an affair. I can just imagine her boss and the IT guy going through those emails together. Okay, let's see, what's in this attachment? How much time theft are we looking at here? Oh my god, close it! Was working maintenance at an ice rink. The rule for anyone who knows how an ice rink works is that if the Zamboni doors open, you get the F off the ice. Some idiot decided to ignore the fact that they were open and that I was standing in the doorway and decided to rip off one last slap shot. The puck bounced off the glass and hit me in the head. I was okay, but I reported it to my boss, because we have to fill out an incident report for things like that. The boss asked, "Are you okay?" and I said, "I feel okay," and then he responded with, "Well, we don't really have to report it then, do we?" I reminded him of the protocol, but it was clear he didn't want to do it. Since he wouldn't do it, I sent a descriptive email of the incident up to the administration, because I felt there should be some sort of documentation or paper trail in case, God forbid, I ended up having a brain hemorrhage or something a few days later. My boss was fired by my next shift. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I was an intern at a tech company, and in a one-on-one mentorship meeting, my boss asked me what skill set I wanted to pursue in the future. I said that I wanted to do back-end work. This was a programming internship, and he replied with, "Girls aren't smart enough for that kind of work. Now, how about we put you on the QA path? You'll do better there." At the time, I was so stunned that I just repeated quietly that I wanted to do back-end work. The meeting awkwardly ended after that. I always thought I'd be courageous in the face of blatant sexism if it ever happened, but instead I was silent because I was a 23-year-old who really needed that internship to turn into a real job. Fast forward a couple of weeks and I was out to lunch with a few co-workers who brought along a lady who had worked at the company for years. She'd been out on contract for a while, so I hadn't met her yet. Everyone was talking about the boss and some of the stuff he'd done or said to them, mostly just rude things, so I took a chance and mentioned what had happened in that meeting. She said she'd take care of it. Within a few days, he was fired by the big boss. I went on my first contract doing back-end work about a month later, and I loved it. As I understand it, I wasn't the first person to have serious complaints about him, just the last person. I had a job that required my supervisor to be doing evaluations of my cases and charts. She just hadn't in months. She and my director ordered me and my co-workers to do our own chart audits, fill out the forms, and they'd sign off. I was so tired of not having adequate supervision, staff meetings weekly where she yelled at us, and invariably someone crying due to stress and lack of support, and not having been paid enough to do everything I was doing and their job. I refused, and I was told to do it or I'd be fired. Nope, I got fired. On my way out to my car, I called my former director who had moved to another agency. She set up an interview for the next day and I had a new job within 24 hours. She asked me what had happened at that interview. I spilled all the tea. Her sister-in-law was on the board of the previous agency, so she called her and I told her everything too. Director was fired and supervisor was reprimanded and put on close monitoring. She had killed any chance of promotion and left shortly afterwards, I heard. I was just happy to have jumped ship from that toxic mess. I should have left months earlier. Our manager spent her whole shift in the office watching us on camera, and if we so much as stopped to talk to each other, she'd come out and yell at us to get back to work. She was completely immature. One time I left my water bottle at the front counter and my co-worker had to stop her from purposefully throwing it away. She'd make up rules on the spot if she didn't like something someone did. I could go on. She was a terrible, unfriendly, hypocritical, mean manager. Honestly, we all just went to the owners and told them everything and how it made us feel. They got HR involved and got her fired and found out she might have been stealing or giving away product. It was such a relief. If you work for a small business, just be honest with the owners if management isn't family. It was my supervisor. It got to the point where I decided to quit. I had my resignation letter in my purse, but decided to let his boss know why I was quitting. Supervisor would talk about all the other people on our team constantly, but only behind their backs. I got so sick of telling him to cut it out. My husband and I happened to work at the same place, different departments, and my supervisor would make inappropriate comments about three-ways with him. Ugh, what hotel we picked for our afternoon delight and stuff like that. It was so uncomfortable. Apart from that, he spent most of his supervising time outside smoking. The problem was, supervisor was one of the guys, and I was the only girl. Turns out, his boss was disgusted. Told his boss, who lost his mind. They started an investigation which took 3 days. They interviewed staff, they corroborated what I said, they checked the security cameras, saw he was spending most of his day outside smoking, and he was fired. When he was told, he guessed that I was the person who complained. No crap, and tried to get me to apologize that I took it the wrong way. The best feeling was my co-workers surrounding me as he was walked out. That was a lovely ending to it all. I proved that he didn't know how to do his job and was just passing my work off as his. I had a boss who refused to make accommodations for a disabled co-worker, refused to keep other staff in line and basically let the disabled worker fall behind and get picked on because she, the boss, felt like she wasn't required to do anything else. I work for a local government agency and reported it to our HR and upper management. After they did nothing, I contacted them again to let them know I'd be filing a suit with the ACLU for ADA violations. My boss was gone in 2 weeks and the rest of the staff had mandatory ADA training. I used math to prove to my boss's superior how severely my boss had underestimated turnover 3 years in a row, costing a ton of money and labor issues. One day earlier, the boss had screamed at my team until his face went purple, making a huge spectacle in front of the entire floor. The gist was that we were colluding against the company by a handful of us electing not to renew our contracts. Came back with graphs and maths, baby. He was demoted and transferred out a couple of weeks later. Pro tip, don't make a grumpy scapegoat out of someone who loves to make Excel graphs. So many people at a certain level here seem to get transferred rather than fired. What are we missing here? Why would you want to keep someone who's neither well-liked or competent? Maybe someone can explain in the comments? He was always slacking off. He'd go and do a 15-minute break and be gone 2 hours. He'd have to shoot off early for a doctor's appointment or a dentist appointment, always with no prior warning, and whenever he was obviously bored. This was, mind you, within weeks of the new shop opening and all of us being hired. I was young and I went along with it for a while. My colleague was in her 40s and vaguely knew him anyway, so she wasn't standing for it. She reported him repeatedly to our area manager, who decided to come down to speak with him about it. The area manager rung in the morning, told him to stay in the shop today and send one of us out for anything that needed doing. He said he had something to do, but his boss said, "Nope, we need you in the shop." Somehow, he didn't get the obvious message and went out anyway. The AM came down and he was gone. My manager wouldn't answer his phone all day. She was furious. At the end of the day, when we were closing up, he walked past, posted his keys through the door, and I never saw him again. Didn't even attempt to argue his case. I got a manager fired because he wrote very inappropriate things to me on Facebook. I'd proven myself as a competent management-level employee. She, on the other hand, showed favoritism, broke rules, and set schedules that nobody could work, and all around didn't give a crap as assistant manager. When the manager left, she assumed she was a shoo-in. After all, she was the assistant, so why wouldn't she be promoted? We both got called into a meeting with the district uppity up, who told us both that I was going to be the new manager, and she lost her crap. I never saw her again, and quickly after, all her relatives that worked there quit mysteriously. She was hired as the new director. Didn't know much of anything about what she claimed she did. The straw that broke the camel's back was when she stated her boss would sign anything she put in front of him because he didn't know what it was. Whoops! I was the head chef of a small restaurant that I eventually owned before my life collapsed, but that's a different story. The owner, who was rarely there, suspected the general manager of stealing. On quiet nights, if she thought that she wasn't making enough on tips, the place was small enough that on slow nights it was just the two of us working, she'd go to the computer from the manager's screen and delete any tables that were paid in cash and just pocketed the money herself. I got suspicious when my food cost numbers that would just never add up to what was being sold. So I got a hold of the software company that ran our computer system, and it turns out they have a back door that even the management can't see that logs every single keystroke. Turns out she'd ripped off close to 20 grand over a 6-month period. She was asked to leave after that, but for some reason the owner didn't bother to press charges. My mother worked for a starting company and her boss really needed her help because the boss wanted my father to invest. He owns a couple of companies. My mother would get a job as a second-rank CEO right under the woman she got fired. In fact, the boss kept treating her like crap, so she told my father. My father told the other investors, and all 3 of them cancelled the deal. They set up the same kind of company with my mum as the only CEO. All people who worked for that former boss left and began working at the new company. My manager at a new job, let's call him Leo, offered to give me a ride home after a Friday night shift went overly long. Instead of turning into my street, he went to a bar about a mile in the opposite direction so we could, quote, get to know each other. I had 1 drink and asked to go home. Instead, he bought me a second one. I asked to go home again and he tried to make a move on me. The details aren't important, let's just say he was pretty aggressive. I emailed the owner of the restaurant about what had happened and went to my shift the next day. The owner was outside the restaurant firing the manager. All on the word of a brand new employee he'd never met. I was so impressed, and the rest of my mostly young female staff were very grateful for the change. That restaurant was a great place to work, actually. 2 years later, I started my first day at my dream restaurant. Did some training, sat down for pre-shift with the kitchen, and who comes out to present the specials? It's Leo, of course. He sees me and freezes up. After pre-shift, he tried to talk to me about working together, but I went straight to my new manager and say I have a history with a current employee that they need to know about. I tell my story, I show the emails between the owner and myself, they talk to Leo about it, and he's fired again. We worked in a really specialized food style where chefs circulate through all the restaurants. He later applied to work for me when I was the hiring manager and didn't get a call back, obviously. I'm out of the industry now, but I used to dream of getting him fired again. I want to haunt him for the rest of his professional life. In short, manager tried to take advantage of me, I reported it and got him fired. 2 years later, I changed jobs to where he worked and got him fired again. Years later, reviewed his application for work, request denied. I do not forgive or forget. F you, Leo. What's your, if I'm going down, I'm taking you with me story? I was rock climbing and this guy who was my belayer for the day was kind of a jerk. Well, no surprise, the guy spends most of his time flirting with a cute girl who's friendly, but seriously not into him. He gets chewed out by our lead for not paying attention, which means he continues to not pay attention as he's incapable of picking up cues. Well, there's me, 25 feet or so off the ground with my rope slack and feeling my hands slipping because I'm just running out of steam. Now, having told him 3 times to pick up the slack, I look down and I see that he's completely ignoring me to chat with this girl again. My mistake was looking down as I reached to readjust my weakening hold and I slipped. The rope shoots out of his limp, sausage-like fingers and I begin to fall. I know a properly tied-off rope shouldn't do that, and I guess he messed that up too. My only thought was, if I'm going to fall, I'm gonna damn well land on him. Well, I did. I landed straight on his cushy jerk body. I was barely injured, by the way. He was taken to hospital after having 80-odd kilos of me land on him from 2 stories up. You know, I never happened to see him at that rock climbing club again. Wow, I mean, you took the going down quite literally here. I once worked for a startup company and they missed one of my paychecks. It wasn't a gigantic deal to me because they were a bit strapped for cash and we had a big release coming soon, and I was decently paid anyway, so I just said, screw it. They then fired me 2 days before release, making it sound like I'd been inadequate despite zero indication from them that I was such before that day. So I made the proper legal arrangements to recoup my missing paycheck and told them I'd be going to Labor and Industry. I'd already filed a complaint. Because if they were going to fire me out of nowhere after I worked 70 hours a week for over a month to try to meet their deadlines, I sure as frick wasn't going to cut them the slack of an entire paycheck. I got my paycheck, they went out of business because they were corrupt and had been misusing investor funds for years, and this was unbeknownst to me by the way, and I laughed all the way to the bank. When I was stationed in Korea, my sergeant threatened to tell command I was drinking underage. Fortunately, I had pictures of our squad drinking and he was present in them, so I told them I'd show them to command if he told on me. Checkmate, Sarge. Now hand me another beer. Whenever you're going to turn someone in for a crime, make sure there isn't direct photographic evidence of you being completely complicit in it. I'm notorious in my friend group for having a fear of water. I'm okay in pools since you can hopefully see the bottom, but even shallow lakes, rivers, and oceans are a no-go for me. Some of my friends ended up renting a boat and they wanted to take it out on the lake and begged me to come out. I kept telling them no way in heck would I ever willingly go out and sit in the middle of a lake. Finally, I caved because, I don't know, they were friends and they really wanted me to go. Someone said it could help me face my fears. Even though I didn't plan on getting in the water, I'm not going to wear jeans to the sunny beach, so I left my wallet, keys, and phone in the car. Within 10 minutes of getting to the middle of the lake, the buddy who suggested I face my fears, and I think his brother, asked me if I've got the time. I shrug and tell them I left my phone back in the car. They both lunge at me and start throwing me overboard. I latch on for dear life and fight as if the river is lava because to me, essentially it is. I eventually realize that I'm going in 100% and there's nothing I can do. So, I let go of the railing I was gripping onto and instead grab them both as I'm pulled back and I force all 3 of us into the water. Getting back on the boat was easy. It had a little ramp and ladder for climbing in and out, and you can bet your butt I was the first one climbing back up. The brothers were mad at me because they had their phones in their pockets and I ruined them. But everyone else quickly pointed out that they pushed me in the water knowing I hated it, and they deserved it. They argued that they intentionally tried to make sure I didn't have anything electronic on me, but everyone shut them down. They were allowed back on the boat when they apologized. My friend apologized and I actually did chip in to help him get a new phone later, but his brother swam back to shore and got even more upset and demanded I pay for his new phone since I helped his brother. But he didn't feel bad or think he did anything wrong, so screw that guy. When I worked as a case manager as an MHMR, we had a new department supervisor come in and she was the worst. Every single person but myself and another case manager quit within the month of this woman starting. I really liked my job and it was also my internship site for my master's degree, so I needed to stay employed there. Since so many people quit, this lady got permission to hire, and it soon became obvious that she wanted to get rid of anyone she hadn't hired and have a department full of people she had personally chosen. Surprise, surprise, most of her hires were crappy, just like her. On top of being an awful human, she also had very little background in mental health and gave truly awful supervision when it came to clients and getting them the services they needed. Since I wasn't a part of the people she had hired, I knew she'd try to get rid of me, so I made sure to document everything. Anytime I staffed a client with her, I'd document her advice in that person's chart, as well as the actions I took due to her advice. I also kept a detailed paper trail and would email her questions about policy so that I'd have a record of her answers, which usually were the opposite of what our policy actually was. She'd even start walking to my desk to verbally give me answers to the questions I sent via email, and I'd have to make up some excuse as to why I needed her answer in an email. Like, I'd tell her a parent or a client had asked and I wanted to be able to give them a verbatim answer, and I could tell that she hated that. Anyway, several months later, I staffed a client with her who I believed needed to be hospitalized, and I wanted to run it by her first as she demanded. The kid had a number of highly dangerous and volatile issues that I believed were a ticking time bomb. She disagreed that this kid needed hospitalization and told me to refer the client to another agency because apparently the client was too high risk for us. Too high risk, but didn't need to be hospitalized? I tried to get her to agree to just call in crisis to assess her, but she denied that as well. I documented what she had told me to do and referred out. Well, literally a day later, this kid brings a piece to school and gets in a ton of trouble, obviously. Thankfully, he was stopped as soon as he stepped through the metal detectors. His mom is angry that my agency just referred him and didn't get him the help he needed, and that a day later he went to try and blast up his school. My supervisor's supervisor is angry as this is a PR nightmare and comes down on my supervisor, but since I was the direct care staff assigned to this client, she blamed it all on me. I ended up getting fired for my, quote, negligence. However, the higher-ups, of course, carefully went through the kid's records and saw all of my documentation regarding the awful decisions my supervisor had made, which led the higher-ups to investigate even more. Basically, there was Medicaid fraud being committed, this lady was lying about her mileage, and being reimbursed way more than she should have been, and all this other lovely stuff. So she was fired as well. I was asked to come back, but frick that place and frick its corruption. When I was in the 8th grade, we had to create a presentation on a book we'd just read, including a skit from one of the scenes. Here's the best part. We were forced to work in groups. Being an introvert, I hate group work. What I hate even more is when your group mates don't do their work. The day we were assigned the project, we decided to divvy up the slides equally. It was a Google Slides, so we could all contribute to the same document. The class ended, and I'd already finished one of my slides. One boy only changed the color of his title, and the other two didn't do anything. 2 days later, I'd finished all of my slides. No one else had done anything. I offered to start the script for the skit since I'd finished, and asked for the others to contribute. Nothing. A couple more days passed, I'd finished the skit as well, and all of the other slides were still empty. Finally, the night before the assignment was due came, I'd hoped that even a title had been added. The slides were still empty. I finally decided to just finish it myself. I was up until about midnight and the slides were not the best quality. Finally, the presentation day comes. Of course, my group mates felt absolutely no remorse for doing no work. It was our turn to present, and my group mates nominated me to present. I finally decided to show them the consequences of their actions. I told them that we were all to present the slides we were supposed to work on. They obviously didn't know what they were doing and were extremely unprepared. My grade went down, but theirs went down even more. There's an old university saying, "At my funeral, I want my group project members to be my pallbearers so they can let me down one last time. We all salute you for lurching out of the coffin and punching them all in the twig and berries on the way down, author." When I was in university, I did a 6-month exchange program in Spain. I took 4 classes while I was there, and all had an equivalent credit at my university in Canada. I was getting A's on all of my classes except one class where I was really struggling, and getting a failing grade on an assignment in that class finally broke me. The professor of this class was the worst. It was an intermediate Spanish class, and he was marking us like he thought we should all be writing Shakespeare. Not only that, but how he told us to complete assignments versus how he marked them would be completely incongruent. He expected us to be doing things that he never taught us, and he shouldn't have been expecting in the first place from an intermediate Spanish class. I realized it wasn't just my problem when the girl from France, whose Spanish was far better than anyone else's, started crying one day after she got an assignment back and begged to understand why she was marked so poorly. He just pointed at her assignment like it was the only explanation required, and then ignored her after that. There was no way to drop the class or switch into another one because of the way it was built into the exchange program, so I decided I'd start emailing the teacher constantly after he gave us assignments, clarifying every little point, coming back with follow-up questions to try and figure out what the heck it was he actually wanted from us. I was spending way more time on assignments than they deserved. This way, if I failed, I'd have this record showing how hard I was working in the class to bring to an administration if I needed to fight it, and all the discrepancies between how he provided assignments versus how he marked them. A couple of days before the final exam teacher evaluation forms came around, I could tell by how long it took us all to turn them in that I wasn't the only one in class unloading on this guy. This was his first semester teaching at the university, so if his teacher evaluations didn't go well, he wouldn't be invited back. If I failed this class, then at least that jerk wouldn't be doing this to someone else next semester. We get our final marks a week later, and I've managed to pull a C- out of my butt. Great, just squeaks by. Then with final marks dispersed, he's allowed to see his teacher evaluations. He sent an email to the entire class that night and lost his fricking mind. We're talking about sections with all caps, multiple exclamation marks, telling us how stupid we all are, and how we don't know what we're talking about. How he's the greatest teacher alive and we're all just bad students. Complete meltdown. The next morning, I found another email from the university this time, stating that Professor Jerkface is no longer with the university and won't be welcome back again, followed by numerous apologies regarding his behavior. I inquired about our grades in light of what happened, but I guess they weren't that apologetic because they refused to change them. Go figure.
You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe.
Current job, previous manager. I was on a team of 2 when the lady I worked alongside with quit, and they decided not to replace her. I have a young child who, as children so often do, gets sick a lot. Being the only person on my team, and the most important role of our office to function, since it's literally the first step in all of our processes, I had a very hard time whenever I used my paid time off with a short notice. I'd given my manager multiple ways to fix the issue, but she'd never hear any of it. She also was in a remote office, so she had zero clue what I did with my day. She finally sent me a very angry email, basically telling me I couldn't use my paid time off for emergencies all the time when my son got sick. I wrote back, detailed a list of every method I suggested to fix the issue, along with the fact that I was the only person in my position for months, and that our company policy states in bold letters that using paid time off because you or your loved one is sick is not only acceptable, but encouraged. My manager responded to my email by stating that she had forwarded my concerns to HR and that I should probably polish up my resume. But HR was in our office that day, for the first time in 6 months. Great coincidence, right? So I went in, asked if I could speak about an issue concerning my manager, and explained everything as it happened. The HR rep had this look on her face like she was going to murder someone. She asked me to forward the entire email chain to her, which I did. Then she called me back in to talk to her. A few people I talked to were aware that the manager and I had issues, and the lead of every team in our office basically told the HR rep that the entire office can't function without me, and that I've been doing the work of 3 people for 9 months. Later that day, my manager sent me a very angry message over email, basically saying I was fired and that I was to pack my things immediately for failing to do my job and because I was causing a hostile work environment. I forwarded this to the HR rep and then walked to her office and asked if I should pack my stuff. She looked at me and in a single sweet sentence said, "Not a chance, she's royally effed." And that's basically how my manager went from making $80K a year to being fired on a Wednesday with no compensation, no benefits, and no way to collect unemployment. All around, a productive day. My dad pushed me into the pool, but before I fell in, I grabbed his arm. In 7th grade, my teacher decided to use process drama to teach about the events leading to persecution of certain peoples in Germany before World War II. He told us we could hide anywhere in the building, and if we successfully evaded him looking for us, we'll get a bunch of extra credit. Conversely, if we're caught, we'll get 5 points for each other classmate we rat out. I hid successfully in the computer class under a spare TV cart that could barely fit me. My soon-to-not-be friend had chosen poorly in the same room and was easily found. Upon walking out, I very clearly remember him yelling, "Wait! Yams is in the corner under the cart." I can't remember being so mad at someone before. I was ratted out for a mere 5 points. I yelled at him and definitely overreacted. The lesson being a process drama, that was kind of the point. to experience the fear and potential rage at your neighbors ratting you out. For those of you who don't know, this lesson's style is to give students first-hand emotional connection to whatever content you'd like to teach. It's incredibly effective. In short, I was taken down along with a classmate, and I lost my extra credit. That's actually a really good and memorable way to demonstrate to a student certain things about humanity, and maybe strengthen their resolve to not be the bad guys in the future. Practical lessons like this are still some of my strongest memories from classes from school. I was at a church camping trip for boys at Yosemite. One of the guys in charge was new and a real D-bag. He made it his goal in life to punish every kid. I was a real rule follower, so he couldn't punish me and started actually getting angry about that. He'd even drop comments like, "Your turn is coming." Now, when I was younger, I was really thin and small, but in my mind I was like all the other kids and mentally tough, so this got me in trouble. I'd get injured in these trips, and the head guy was always getting in trouble with my parents for not keeping me safe. So one of the rules is that nobody can ever be alone. If you're caught alone at any time, you're in trouble. So we're getting the campfire ready for lunch, and some kid comes running up to the group and says that there's an undressed woman bathing in the river. All of the other kids get up and run to go see. So to not be alone, I have to go with the group. Now, I don't go to the edge and look because I didn't feel like it was right to go spy on some poor woman just trying to enjoy nature. Anyway, D-bag leader sees this as his opportunity and says that since I got up and went over with the group, I was also in trouble, despite the fact that I had no other choice. Punishment at this camp was holding a giant rock over your head. Somehow I was the only one that got in trouble. Not everyone else that looked, proving that he didn't care about actual rules, but just that he had power over everyone. I was supposed to hold this rock over my head for 15 minutes and then come back. Of course, he was too lazy to oversee punishments, so I was supposed to do this alone, which is another problem since there are bears and preverts around. No kid is supposed to be alone there. Finally, since I didn't deserve the punishment, I decided I was going to take this guy down. So I dropped the rock on my head on purpose. Then I just laid there. I could feel a large bump rising on my head. I must have laid there for about 35 minutes. Finally, they realized I didn't show up for lunch, and someone asked where I was, and then everyone ran over to see me laying there with a rock next to my head. I said that the last thing that I remembered is that my arms were getting weak holding the rock over my head. Then the leader checked my head and found the bump. He was livid because now he had to tell my mom I got hurt again. When asked why I was holding a rock over my head, I made sure to let them know that it was the D-bag leader's punishment. He tried to deny it, but 25 young voices called him a liar simultaneously, since they'd all endured the same punishment. D-bag leader was stripped of his power and spent the rest of the camp as just another camper. In fact, he called someone and left a day early. It was his first and last activity with the group. My uncle used to own a hardware store in our crappy little town. He wanted to put up a cover between two buildings that he owned, but the town council wouldn't let him. They never gave any real reason, like we need to leave the area uncovered because of XYZ building codes. They just went on a power trip and said, "You're not gonna do it." Eventually, due to some other power trips, my uncle threatened to move his shop a few towns over. The town council went, "You're not gonna do it," in a kind of a "I dare you" way, so my uncle did just what he was saying he'd do. If I remember correctly, he paid the most in taxes, so all the money the town was getting from him disappeared. Most of his employees were in high school and couldn't drive. When he moved, the kids went with him. Since the parents had to drive their kids to their job, they decided they'd also pick up groceries and other things they needed while they were in the new town. So the clothing shop and grocery store went out of business. Since no one could get what they needed in our small town, just about everyone moved. Now the town is run down and there's barely anything there. My dad said it used to be a nice little town. Now hardly anyone lives there and everything is falling apart. My uncle even warned the council if I leave I'll take this town with me, but they didn't listen. My next-door neighbor kept picking my plum tree dry when I'd go out of town, so I just cut it down out of frustration. No plum jelly for anyone. I had a group project I had to do with 4 other people. 3 of the 4 were great, but there were roles each of us had to fill in the group for the project to work right. The final girl never once participated in the project, so her role was completely empty and it was dragging the rest of us down. We just couldn't fill in for her either because she kept her specific instructions to herself. The other 3 and I did the best we could, but our instructor didn't seem impressed. We had a few questions about how we came to our conclusions and who did what in the group. The other three were trying to keep focus on the roles they filled out, but the instructor was asking about the role that the other girl skipped out on. I answered that we didn't have anything from that role because What's-Her-Face didn't come to any of the project sessions. We just did what we could without her. Up until that point, the girl that didn't do anything was standing there acting like she deserved the same grade we all got. Once I said something, the other three girls confirmed that yes, Becky's butt did 0% of the work. She tried to say she was just really busy, but another girl shut her down by saying she saw her at several parties the past couple of weeks. That girl got a 0, and the rest of us got like an 85 or around that number. I felt like a snitch, but screw Becky. Growing up, my best friend and I got in trouble for cutting up brand new, expensive jeans to make shorts. Her mum was rightfully screaming at me, so I said, "What about your daughter? She asked me to and handed me the scissors." And I got us both grounded, so at least we could sit together in her room. Introverts. What's the craziest thing you've done to avoid human interaction? I was 5 minutes late to school, so I decided to skip school altogether that day to avoid the awkward class entry. College. I had to attend an out-of-town conference with my classmates as part of the requirements for a course. My professor had booked a block of rooms at the hotel where the conference was held, and people were going to put 3 to 4 guys or girls to a room and split the cost. My classmates had a bunch of socializing and bar hopping planned, which sounds like my idea of a living hell. Also, all of them carpooled together in groups. I honestly would rather have walked barefoot across a mile of Legos than be held hostage in a car for 4 hours with people I barely know. A few people asked if I wanted to carpool with them and what room I was in, and I said, "Oh, thank you so much. I'm actually staying with a friend in town though, and I'm stoked to see her. I'm going to have to take my own car so I can drive to the conference. I'll catch you guys there," just so I wouldn't come off as a weirdo. But I actually reserved a room at another hotel way across town, attended the bare minimum of the conference, and enjoyed as many coffee shops, art museums, downtown shopping trips, and nature trails as I could. When I was in the military, I volunteered for a deployment to get out of going to a wedding. Back when I had roommates I didn't know very well, I'd spend all day in my room without meals to avoid awkward pleasantries. Then I'd get really hungry, but the prospect of explaining why I'd spent all day in my room kept me inside. Then they'd text me and ask me if I was okay, and I'd say, "Yep, just keeping busy with some projects." And they'd ask if I'd eaten anything since they hadn't seen me, and I'd say, "Yep, trust me, I'd never go without food." And then I'd wake up at midnight and steal my own food from the fridge. I've done the same thing, except I already knew my roommate pretty well. He just had some company over that I didn't want to talk to. So I stayed in my room for 2 days, except for like 3 or 4 in the morning, when I'd sneak out to get food from 24-hour fast food joints. The narrator is incapable of waiting for longer than like 2 hours without going feral and making a sprint for the fridge and cupboard, so your restraint is equally as impressive as your massive, massive introverted bent. In high school, I didn't have a car, so I just walked home. I used to just walk fast to try and beat the crowd of people, but I just didn't want to deal with it anymore, so I would stay in the computer lab sometimes and ask my dad to pick me up a few hours later. So once the bell rang to go home, I'd just stay in class since I had computers last. The teacher would forget I was there and not even notice me and turn the lights off, lock the door, and then leave. Honestly, I didn't mind at all. I got to play video games by myself, and one time, about an hour and a half later, the janitor came in and I guess I scared him. He turned on the lights and literally screamed when he saw me. Rather than associate with my nosy aunt when I lived with her, I told her I was going out for a while, moved my car up the street, and sat in it watching Netflix on my phone for a couple of hours. I killed my already dead grandma a couple of times to get out of social events. "Hey man, you gonna make it to the party?" "I can't. I have plans to go murder my grandma instead." I went to an empty room and stood in the dark for 45 minutes to avoid a team bonding event. In 7th grade, I'd hide in the science lab during lunch and recess time and feed and play with the school pets. I'd ask to use the bathroom around 10 minutes into lunch and then come back in the last 2 minutes, and they probably thought I had some real bad bowel issues. There were 2 birds, a bunny and 2 guinea pigs. I'd feed them carrots and talk to them. Nobody knew that I was there for half the year when one of my teachers finally walked in on me. I thought I was busted. Luckily, she was one of the nicer ones and made it my official job to play with and feed the animals. I had something similar happen in 7th grade. I don't remember how it started, but at one point a couple of 8th grade girls bullied me and I volunteered to help a teacher during her lunch period, same as mine. I'd grade spelling tests, so she hired me as her assistant and I graded papers. I was a very good student and spelling was my jam, so it's not like I hated it. Fun fact, we're now friends on Facebook 35 years later. What a great teacher. But the fact is, I'm sure she loved me for saving her from taking home a bunch of stuff to grade. I go through the drive-thru just to park and eat alone in my car. I went on a 3-week camping trip to avoid 2 family reunions. I'm going to be driving across country starting tomorrow to avoid my family's Thanksgiving dinner, so I feel you. I stopped talking for an entire year of school, 5th grade to be precise. Getting off the bus at the wrong stop and walking because I pressed the stop button too soon and didn't want to tell the driver. When I was 12, a man in a suit who I didn't know knocked on the door. I could see him through the front room window, so I hid behind the chair. I looked up to see if he had gone and made eye contact. I stayed where I was. Wasn't the last time that happened either. I'm 29. A guy knocked on my door and I looked into the peephole and he was looking directly gazing back into it at me, so I ducked and crouched at the base of the door, and then he opened the mail slot to look in, which was right above me, and I just laid on the ground until he went away. I wear headphones all the time, even if they're off or not plugged in. I'm so much more productive at work, people at the gym let me be, and people on the street leave me alone on my walk home. My roommate threw a party at my house and I hid from everyone. There's only one front door and everyone would see me if I left and would want to talk to me. I avoided eating that whole night because I didn't want to walk by the party to get my food. My car was trapped between other cars. I ended up jumping out of a second-story window and walking 3 miles to a 7-Eleven. I'm not as shy and introverted as I used to be, but now I have moods where I don't even want to see a single person until the mood is past. When I was living in dorms in college, I'd stand in my closet or bathroom for hours just so I wouldn't have to see the people talking in my room. I ended up hearing a lot of conversations I shouldn't have heard because nobody ever knew I was there. Going to cross the street, but then stopping and pretending I don't have to if there's a car approaching, so I don't inconvenience them. I once spent a weekend in a hotel because I wanted to be alone and chill reading books and watching TV. The people I lived with at the time couldn't spend more than an hour on their own without some sort of social interaction. The roomie I have now is like-minded and we can go days without talking or seeing each other, and it's great! I was getting a taxi back home and I must have mumbled or garbled my destination because it was quite clear he was going to a completely different place. Like literally as soon as he turned right out of the parking lot instead of left. I literally let the guy drive for 15 minutes in the wrong direction, eventually just blurting out, "Anywhere here will do," and giving him a tenner, and then just walking aimlessly until I found public transport that I recognized and jumped on that. A 10-minute cab drive turned into a nearly 2-hour journey home. For those who are curious and who live in Manchester, I wanted to get a cab from Ashton to Openshaw and I ended up going to Oldham, getting a tram to the city centre and getting a train from there back home. There was only a front door in the place I was living and there was a very large crowd of neighbours outside having some sort of social gathering or barbecue. I really needed to pick up some food for dinner, but I really didn't want to interact with them. So I jumped out of the living room window, walked the long way around the neighbourhood to get to the store. Thankfully, they kept the party out front so that when I came back, I could sneak back in through the window. Okay, so the narrator thought that he was an introvert, but a lot of you are showing me just how comparatively okay and well-adjusted I'm doing in day-to-day life. I actually go out of my way to cross the road slower and make eye contact if it looks like a car is revving or accelerating to intimidate me to cross quicker. I think it's up to us to make them obey the road rules. I have phone anxiety. I was going to drive 1.5 hours to my college to talk to them in person over the summer instead of just calling to follow up on something. I lived in a loft downtown on the 3rd floor. The amount of times I used the stairs in an effort to not be trapped in an elevator with a stranger is too many to count. One time there was a family moving in. I walked all the way around the building to the opposite side's entrance to get into the building. Then they were using the elevators, so I took the stairs. Then they were on my floor moving crap in. I didn't want it to look like I was trying this hard to avoid them, so I said, "Whoops, wrong floor," and walked up 2 extra floors and waited 10 minutes before going back down to see if they were gone. What should have taken me 5 minutes took me closer to 30 to get into my apartment. That's when I realized I might have a problem. I never answer the door unless I'm expecting someone. Just today, actually, my neighbor was knocking on my door this morning and I didn't answer. When it was time to head to work, I realized I didn't have my keys. I think my neighbor found them and was trying to return them. Okay, sure enough, I left my keys in the door last night, and my neighbor was nice enough to try to return them. But since I never answer my door, he took them to the front office. Let this be a lesson to my fellow introverts. Don't leave your keys in the door. I routinely cross streets or turn down streets that are in the wrong direction of where I'm going to avoid awkward interactions with vehicles as a pedestrian. Please don't stop and give me that "it's okay to go" wave when there's still traffic barreling down the opposite side of the street and you're the only vehicle trying to be courteous. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but it would be easier for everyone if you just kept driving. I failed an important test once because I was too scared to ask the teacher for a pencil. If I notice someone waiting for the elevator when I'm leaving work, I'll turn around and go back to my office acting like I forgot something just so I don't have to endure 15 floors of not talking to someone I barely know. It's a daily thing. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I ordered flour from Amazon to make my own bread, since Amazon didn't deliver bread. I took a Maymester course one year and had to move out of my old dorm into a new one for 1 month. I had a new suite mate, we shared a bathroom, and I didn't speak with him the entire time. I'd only use the bathroom if I was certain he was gone. In my defense, he seemed to do the exact same. I often find that if I don't make the effort, most other people don't either. I googled what time the Apple Store closed instead of asking someone whilst in the Apple Store. There was a couple of months, besides going to mandatory things like work or school, where I didn't leave my room or interact with anyone. All I did between work and sleep was eat and read. In order to avoid a mandatory Christmas social for work, the Christmas party was mandatory because I was working at a preschool, and the company wanted to up their reputation as a family-oriented organization to the rich parents who were throwing insane amounts of money at the company to babysit their kids. So they had a preschool Christmas concert followed by an after-party for the parents to get to know the faculty, as if we didn't see them every fricking day at drop-off and pick-up. The party was also meant to be a way for us co-workers to get to know each other, as if we hadn't worked together Monday to Friday, 7 till 6 p.m. every fricking week. Screw that. I legitimately took myself to the ER just to get the registration wristband for proof that I actually went to the hospital, and then I left. I wasn't sick or anything, and I didn't even see a doctor. I just needed a hospital wristband to prove that I had a reason not to go to the work mixer, so that I wouldn't get fired. I hated my co-workers. I hid under a bed while a real estate agent showed a couple around my flat. I couldn't be bothered to go out, but I can't stand small talk, so I decided to lay low. I had a cup of tea, cushions, a Nokia phone with Snake on it. I was quite happy under there. They were 25 minutes late. I guess I was under the bed for just over an hour. I feared a sneeze. I was in my early 20s, by the way. I work at a hotel, and one of the worst things about it are the really chatty guests. They'll just stand at my desk and jibber-jabber, completely failing to take the hint. Even saying, "Excuse me, I have a lot of work to do," will typically only get them to say, "Oh, don't let me interrupt," but then they'll never walk away. I've learned to call the hotel phone from my cell phone. I answer the phony call and tell the guest, "Excuse me, this is important." Then I slip into the back and watch them on the video monitors until they F off. I saw a coworker from my new job at the bus station. I couldn't bear the idea of awkward chit-chat, so I hid around the corner, figuring I'd get the next bus as I knew I had enough time. The next bus didn't turn up, and I was late for work. I went on an entire week-long vacation out of the country by myself. I went sightseeing, went on tours, ate out at a restaurant, all by myself, and didn't talk to anyone I didn't have to. It was amazing. I was invited to the birthday party of an old high school friend who was part of the popular crowd in those days. I knew it would be a big party full of super outgoing people that I didn't really want to interact with all at once. My solution? Join a music ensemble. learn 4 different instruments with rehearsals twice a week for 4 months because the concert date was the same as the party, and that would give me a valid and honest excuse to skip. So instead of talking to people, I played close to 50 collective hours of serialist and phase music. Not a bad trade in my books. The postman was knocking on my door, so rather than answer it, I decided to army crawl past the door so that he wouldn't see me through the frosted glass. Then he pushed open the letterbox and saw me splayed across the floor. Okay, what is with all the people who decide to behave like velociraptors and terminators when they're checking if people are home? I mean, in this case, they were successful and revealed the people hiding from them, but it's kind of a breach of privacy and rude. Maybe more acceptable for this mailman who probably just wants to dump a package, but that guy in the suit earlier was way out of line. So, this thread is making me realize I'm not as shy and introverted as I thought I was. Bravo! Apparently on the internet, introvert is synonymous with crippling social anxiety that ruins your life. Telling the pizza guy through a cracked door that I didn't order pizza just to avoid talking face to face was kind of my low point. I used my then 3-year-old child as a human shield on the couch when my husband brought company over before a trip. I just hid behind her. 3.5 years later, one of those friends is now considered family to us, and I love that bro dearly. I took my breakfast into a wheelchair stall at a remote toilet in the corner of the floor that I worked so that I wouldn't have to talk to my coworkers. I was at a dorm party in college. I became overwhelmed and hid under my girlfriend's bed. They looked for me and everything. Once I was able to rejoin the party, I strolled back in and acted like I'd stepped out. I cringe thinking about that. This is hilarious. Thank God they didn't find you. Dude, one time my girlfriend and I threw a party at our own darn house. I felt the anxiety coming on at some point and went to my room, laid down in my dog's bed with my dog and just laid there. When they came looking, I pretended to be passed out drunk. I was sober and awake. Every single day, I order Starbucks on the app, no matter how inside the store I am. A lot of days there isn't even a line, but that doesn't stop me. I'm not proud of this, but I spent the last 10 years building an investment portfolio that I could live on and retire early. The reason I wanted so badly to retire was so that I didn't have to spend time with banalities like small talk and pointless meetings with my coworkers. So, in a nutshell, I went frugal, saved and invested my money, and stopped working, all just to avoid talking to Bob from accounting. When I'm stuck at an event or party I don't want to be at but can't immediately leave, I tend to spend a lot of time in the bathroom browsing Reddit. I'm normally introverted and hate crowds and strangers. If someone unexpected rings my doorbell, I'll Spider-Man crawl under windows and throughout my damn house to try to see who it is without alerting them to the fact that I'm home. However, when I was in high school, I'd still go to house parties or the club with my friends, even though I hated clubbing with every fiber of my being. Peer pressure is really the worst. The problem would arise when I became drunk. Suddenly, I'd be convinced that I needed to be far away from any and all human interaction, so I'd find a place to hide. I never went too far because even in my drunken state, I didn't want my friends to worry, but there are numerous stories about me disappearing while on the sauce, and for the most part, no one could ever find me unless I let them. I've hidden in playgrounds, in bushes, a forest, my friend's sister's bedroom closet, a tool shed, the backseat of my own car, around the side of a house beside a wheelbarrow, under a bed, in a laundry room, numerous bathrooms, and there were also a few times where I was really drunk that I tried to hide in a corner and convinced myself that no one could see me. The most embarrassing was probably the drunkest I've ever been. I don't even fully remember it since I blacked out. My friend used to have house parties in his parents' basement, and again, I decided I needed to get away, so I went to his upstairs kitchen and hid under their kitchen table. What I was too drunk to realize was that his 3 older brothers were in the attached living room watching a movie at the time. I left eventually for a corner in the basement, but that night dubbed me as the dead girl in the corner because my friend's brother kept apparently asking him, "Okay, but what should we do with the dead girl in the corner?" Clubs were different because I didn't want to leave and risk not being able to get back in, so my friends always knew that if I was missing, I was probably in a bathroom stall and they'd have to try to coax me out. As I've gotten older, I've pretty much stopped drinking altogether, and after a few not quite drunk enough club outings, I've told my friends that clubbing just wasn't for me anymore. I knew once I started bringing a book to a club so that I could read it in a bathroom stall that it just wasn't worth my time, money, or discomfort anymore. In short, I hide when drunk or spend time at the club reading in a bathroom stall to avoid socializing with people. I choose to have my parcels delivered to a collection point that I have to drive to rather than risking having to speak to my neighbors. My girlfriend's roommate came back one night with a bunch of their friends that I'd never met before. I'm not particularly skilled socially, nor do I care to be, but I can get through introducing myself and making a good first impression to 1 or 2 people at once, but 10 people is too many. So my girlfriend goes to talk to all of them and wants me to meet them. So I say I'll be out soon, I have a bit of a headache. So I think for a while of how I'm going to get through this, but then I realize that it's been so long that if I go out now, it'll be super awkward. Then I hear someone coming in, so I hide in the closet. Now, I really can't get out of there, so I stay in the closet for a while. Then I come out and get into bed and pretend to be sleeping. When my girlfriend comes back in, she wakes me up and asks me where I was, so I pull a George Costanza and lie and say that I snuck out and went to the store to get some aspirin and then snuck back in and fell asleep. She wants to know why I didn't go through the front door and say hi to everyone on my way out, so I said that I didn't want to disturb their fun, so I went out the side door. I'm willing to pay an extra $300 in rent if it means I get the whole place to myself. I called in sick on the day of a big company all-hands meet and greet. I dropped a college course when I heard 2 people whisper my name behind me. What was the weirdest black market in your school? Mountain Dew and Pepsi had a contest where college names were printed on the inside of the bottle caps. If that school won the NCAA March Madness tournament, you could send it in for the jersey of your choice from any school. Suddenly, the black market for caps with blue-chip schools was born. I remember selling a Duke cap for $10, then turning around and buying 10 drinks from the vending machine. This one girl forged excuse notes if you brought her something one of your parents wrote. I never used her services myself, but we were and still are good friends, and I've got to say, she's really talented. I literally can't tell which one is mine after she copied something I wrote, including the signature. It's baffling. Our middle school tried to start a reward program. It turned out to be a failure of epic proportions. Wolf Bucks, named after our mascot. They were mini-sized dollars, color-coded by value. Green was $1, red was $5, blue was $10, and a gold wolf buck, only accessible to the principal and assistant principal, was $50. Now the school bought erasers, pencils, notebooks, and you could only buy them with wolf bucks. 1 pencil was 1 wolf buck. The first failure? It was very easy to copy. So kids started mass copying them. Okay, so the school got smart and said, only accepting wolf bucks with your name and your teacher's signature on it. Their second failure was keeping the same color, so kids would earn one legitimately and then the forgery started. And the third failure? Hyperinflation during pep rallies, where the principal started throwing golden wolf bucks. Eventually, the school stopped resupplying the store. Everyone had hundreds or thousands of worthless wolf bucks. Harry Potter books. I went to a religious school where books that had magic or fantasy were banned. Parents of these kids were just as religious, so kids couldn't get them from their parents. My mum didn't care, and she let me buy a few for some friends, and then more kids started requesting them. I charged double what they were worth, and kids were more than happy to pay. Most popular requests were Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, and Cirque du Freak series. It just goes to show that prohibiting creates an intense demand, and people willing to take risks potentially make a lot of money. I'll bet most of the teachers didn't care anyway. This happened in Los Angeles in the mid-80s. Student bus passes had to be purchased by the 5th day of the month, or you were stuck having to pay daily. The date had passed, so I found a guy in my high school willing to trade another student's pass which he'd stolen. I traded a tangerine and half a pack of cigarettes for a copy of Penthouse. Then I traded that issue with a pizza from the cafeteria for the bus pass. This wasn't a weird one, but a genius one for a tween. A girl set up a little business out of a box of stationery, writing forged letters from parents. She had had all different paper, pens, and pencils of every kind, and could write in convincingly accurate tones for the content of the notes, depending on which kid they were used for. She even used different styles of handwriting and different styles of punctuation and language, too. She'd even fudged the spelling if she thought the kid's parents weren't great at it. She grew up to be incredibly educated. I look back and see that as her first moment of evil genius. It definitely suggested she'd go on to brilliance one day, and she did. In early elementary school, we had a market for mud. Different groups of kids would claim areas around the school as their mud pit and put their brand of mud in Ziploc bags to be traded with other groups for different bags of mud. We were the clay mud group, and I had about 3 kids in the muck scooping it into bags or running it to the water fountain to get fresh water to make more mud on dry days. I'd be the one to go make the deals with the other groups. We traded a lot with the gravel mud group because clay mud and cement mud are both good for building or something like that. Who knows? It made so much more sense at the time. The principal and staff eventually stepped in to end it because all of the kids came back to class filthy every day and giant holes littered every field and playground. One of my friends sold Starburst from his locker. 10 cents for 2 pieces. If he likes you, you got 2 from the normal bag. If he didn't like you, you got 2 from the bag that only had yellows. I had a friend that used to bring a bunch of Coke cans from home and then sell them for $1 at lunch. Cheaper than the vending machine prices, so it became a bit like a little business. He eventually saved up enough for a longboard. A teacher at my high school that I refused to rat on would take money from students and buy them lottery tickets or scratch-offs in exchange for a cut of any prize $50 and up. I think the guy legit made a few $1,000s off this just during my senior year, and it made the students love him. Salt. My school canteen doesn't have any salt with chips, or fries to you Americans, and people used to sell salt packets. The most expensive offer I could find was 50 pence for a packet or £1 for 3. Diddle paper. It's coloured paper with a mouse drawn on it, but everyone collected them, no matter how old, and there were hundreds of different artworks. People had folders with protective covers, and depending on the motive and rarity you wanted to trade, you could get 3 to 4 others in exchange. It was wild. I just googled it and there are still collectors buying and selling them on the internet. Our elementary school utilized ice cream tickets. You got one if it was your birthday or if you did something that a teacher thought was exemplary. People would pass them around asking for favors down the line. Some kid found the paper used to make the tickets and Xeroxed multiple pages of the tickets. He became our kingpin and ruled us for a couple of years. I think I was 16 when this happened, but basically a bunch of guys began printing paper that looked like contracts with the top saying "Soul Contract." They came up to some of the younger students and got them to sign the document to sell their soul for eternity, and would pay them $2 to $3. We had a good laugh when some of the students became worried they actually sold their soul. Our school did this too. The kids who regretted it had to buy their souls back at a 50% markup. Noah still has my soul. I never bought it back. Noodle seasoning packets. My best friend, at 11 years old, found out that the dumpster behind the video store had a lot of sample tapes for adult films. Basically, it was like the best parts of 4 different adult movies clipped down and put into one VHS to try and sell those videos to the store. And then it would have, "This is a sample copy," flashing on the screen, but you still got hardcore stuff, and all of the bits for which an 11-year-old were way more than we could handle anyway. We'd sneak up there in the middle of the night and steal a bunch of the tapes and sell them for $5 to $10 a piece. We made several $100s. I built a PC and put a CD burner in it with my share of the money. It might have also paid for a bike, but I might have mowed lawns for that. I forget which year it happened in and if they were the same summer. This wasn't in school, but yeah, I was distributing hardcore adult films to a bunch of 11-year-olds. Finally, our ring got busted and my friend got his butt beat when he fell asleep with the VHSs in his TV that rewinds and plays it automatically. His mum came to wake him up and there was that on the TV. He had to unveil his stash space. To be fair, the guy kept his mouth shut, didn't rat me out and said it was just for him. He didn't tell her it was a business we were running. We kind of had a history of this. One summer when we were like 6, we started freezing soda into an ice cube tray because it was yummy and made our extremely meager soda allowance last much longer while we were playing Sega. Well, some kids around the neighborhood wanted some, but we didn't really want to give them up. We decided to sell them for $0.25, but all of our soda pops got bought up. But by then we had enough money for several 2 liters. Well, the next day we made a bunch more and kids were rabid for them. We did 2 batches of every ice cube tray we had, and upped it to 50 cents a cube. Next day, we went to $1 a cube with special mixes. $1.50 for a Surge Cube, enough to buy an entire 2-liter bottle at the time, and, well, by the time parents were getting home from work, our racket got shut down. Parents were angry. We made bank. Certainly over $100 on the 3-day racket, and all of this as kindergarten-aged kids. The parents wanted the money back, but we said we spent it all. We were big fricking liars. I mean, we had plans for all the money, sure, and we spent a lot of it. We had huge bags of soda and chips stuffed in a stairwell where our parents wouldn't find it. Man, we had a great summer that year. Wait, these kids were like mafia smugglers from the age of 6? Man, you guys were born for this. You're either in prison or you're running companies of your own with that sort of cutthroat attitude and enterprise. Impressive, if not commendable. One day, my high school decided to stop selling soda because they were trying to pass some sort of audit. The very next day, my friend and I showed up with cases of cold soda in our backpacks, selling them for 50 cents apiece. We were sold out by lunchtime every day for about 2 weeks until they plugged the vending machines back in. I wouldn't say ours was weird, but my friend in high school had like a prepper granddad waiting for Y2K, and he literally had crates filled with cartons of off-brand cigarettes. So my friend would steal a few cartons, bring them to me, and I'd sell them out of my locker. I'd charge $3 a pack, and he'd get $1 and I'd get the other 2, or 50 cents for loose cigarettes, and we'd just split that down the middle. I only kept like 6 packs in a pencil case, 5 whole and 1 open for the loose ones to sell, in my locker at a time. He'd have the rest in his locker at the other end of school, and I'd just go refill as needed between classes for lunch. One time, a teacher called the cops because I was acting shady. They pulled me out of class and brought in a drug dog to search my locker. I'd just sold my last Lucy and pack like 10 minutes before that. The dog didn't find anything, but the cops went through everything, and when they opened the pencil box, there were little shreds of tobacco inside. He asked what it was, and I said, well, it's a pencil box, I'd guess it's probably pencil shavings. And he just kind of shrugged and put it back. I went right on back to selling cigarettes the next day. Oh, I'd also trade 1 Lucy for a meal ticket, which is how our lunch system worked, and I'd sell the meal tickets for $1 each and split that with my buddy as well. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Bottle caps. I still don't get it, but back in primary school, they were collecting bottle caps for some kind of charity. Google it, it's still going on around the world. So what happened was everything was going well, the teacher got everyone excited about it, and the kids were collecting it en masse. Kids would go around raiding for it, from the trash, from their school lunches, from their homes even. A teacher got a call from a concerned parent because her kid hijacked all of the bottle caps from their kitchen. So that's stage 1 of the weirdness. It's what happened afterwards. Stage 2, kids start trading with those plastic bottle caps. We'd trade pens, homework, even Pokemon cards for bottle caps. Worthless bottle caps. There wasn't even a prize for whoever could collect the most caps, it just became a currency out of nowhere. Let's talk about stage 3 of this madness. Theft. There was no bank of bot caps at our school. There was the donation box and there were your cubbies. Those who didn't want to lug their stash back home every day left it in their cubbies, and some kid decided to steal people's caps from the donation box. The great theft of Class 3B. But it was probably for the best because overnight the madness subsided. The teacher ended the bottle cap donation. She was sick of the bugs that were gathering and licking up the dried sugar juices from the caps anyway, but mostly horrified at how her little charity drive devolved into a socio-economical experiment. So just like that, the bottle cap market crashed. We did a weird assignment for a month where we ran a society for an hour each day in our classroom. People had little shops they ran from their desks, they were elected positions, laws you could be ticketed for breaking, etc. It was all run on fake money, of course. I got elected chief of police and handed out tickets for stuff like chewing gum in class. But a combination of laziness and not wanting everyone to hate me caused me to slack off, and I got fired after 2 weeks. So I opened a shop instead and sold stuff, including gum, which in hindsight makes me like a cop who becomes a substance dealer. The final week of this rolls around and there was an announcement. At the end, all of your money will be tallied up, any debts or taxes you owe subtracted, and any kid who wound up with a positive amount gets a pizza party. Kids who are in the red have to write an assignment on how and why they screwed up. This electrifies the class. Missing out on a pizza party is a big deal when you're 10, and well under half the class is currently in the black. Tons of them have taken out big loans in the beginning to set up businesses and had no way to repay them. Not me though, as I'd been receiving a salary as a cop, and after being fired, I just used the money I'd accumulated to set up shop and had no debts. Few in the class could say that, so I was sitting pretty. Soon I started receiving offers of real money on the playground for some of my fake money. You only needed to be $1 over zero to win, so I could spare plenty. I made about $40 in actual cash. I think I charged $5 for 100 fake dollars and I got 8 people to accept. So I was a corrupt cop who became a substance dealer who became a money launderer. And I won. So I definitely learned a lot about how society works. I organized the black market. My school banned Pokemon cards, so I made a new game with paper cards. I was drawing pretty well, so I folded a paper in 9, made pieces approximately the size of a Pokemon card, and created a whole new game out of this. I sold boosters for 10 cents. Spent all of my afternoons drawing cards for the school. Teachers eventually heard of it and couldn't ban it because it was still officially me distributing things. Then I started to do replicas of Pokemon cards. Like people had to show me the proof after school that they owned the card. I made a replica, and then the whole Pokemon card trading continued with paper replicas. Then after school, people made the real exchanges based on what replicas they exchanged during school. I used to sell bags of sugar and Kool-Aid, like bootleg lick'em sticks. Also sold red-hot toothpicks I made from cinnamon oil. When I got into high school, my family was one of the first to get a computer. I made a killing from printing out fake report cards. I was quite the entrepreneurial little bag of crap. Again, I wonder whether the kids who feature in these stories are just thugs capitalizing on a market, or whether this drive and entrepreneurship were the signs of early genius of some sort. There's probably a bit of each in varying levels scattered through these stories, I guess. In year 10, I was able to gain access to a teacher's account on my school tablet, which allowed me to get internet access. I then realized I could open a hotspot, which allowed other students to have internet access on their tablets. All of this was necessary because we weren't allowed to have cell phones. I decided to charge $10 a week for each student that wanted to subscribe for internet access, which I was distributing. I started receiving requests from students not in the radius of the hotspot, and thus I figured out a way for users to SSH connect to my school tablet and use it to gain internet access. It was a mess, and the network became too slow, but I was still getting paid regardless. Best of all, the IT guy knew what I was doing, but he couldn't stop it since the school only employed one person to handle everything, and thus he was too busy to do anything about it. Drawings. It started out as a joke. Some kids make beautiful drawings and trade them for other drawings. At one point, we decided to give them a value. If a drawing was really pretty, let's say 8 out of 10, we'd number it with 8, and you could trade it for 2 4s. There were kids that wouldn't draw but were chosen to rate these drawings. At one point, kids would trade snacks for beautiful drawings. This started in my class, and in a couple of days, the whole school was doing it. My drawings were okay, but not great, and sadly, I never got snacks to bring to school, so I had nothing to trade. So I decided to recruit other kids that were really good and would be their manager, so they had more time to draw. I had siblings in other grades, so I'd contact them to trade these in their class so there was more ground to collect snacks from. I also bargained with the kids that would rate the drawings, promising them a share of the snacks. My clients would share their snacks with me as a payment for my services. I still remember those stupid horse flower drawings. Horse girls went nuts over these and would give anything for them. In high school, I was the only kid in my year who knew how to download music to your phone. I'd make a list of songs people wanted and would transfer these through Bluetooth. I'd charge 1 cookie for 1 song. There was a tree at one end of the playground that had loads of small jade rocks underneath. We had a full mining operation using stones as spades to find them. Not really black market, but kind of. It was in the 90s and most people had a computer, but internet was still very slow when you had it. I was a teen and had managed to get my hands on a CD-ROM with 3 adult videos on it, the kind of CD-ROM that was offered with the magazine you could find on the highest shelf of the newspaper stand. I was starting to know all 3 videos by heart, so I decided to lend it to a friend, and then I kind of forgot about it. A few days later, I noticed that during class, another unrelated person was lending my video to yet another guy. My CD-ROM was having a life of its own, moving from hand to hand, providing happiness along its way. I was very proud. There was a black market at my school for leaves and feathers that were deemed to be cool. People would genuinely pay 2 New Zealand bucks for a frickin' leaf. Looking back at it, it's actually kind of funny. Spicy sweet chili Doritos. This one kid would buy every single bag out of the vending machines and sell them for like double the cost. I ran a black market in my school. You remember Columbia House, where you could get 10 VHS movies for like 99 cents, but then you had to buy 5 more at a regular price? Well, I did the math and figured out what the actual price per videotape was after all commitments to the club were made, and it was like $5. So I took orders from classmates, bought movies for them, and then sold them at a slight markup. Basically, I was undercutting Suncoast. Pogs, back in the 90s. Sure, you could easily trade your standard, commercial Pogs out in the open. We'd do it before and after class. Teachers and administrators didn't care. "Oh look, it's got Simba on it, cute," I remember one of them saying. But there was a darker, more interesting trading game afoot, lurking in the boys' bathroom mid-class. The kind that, if found, would easily get you detention or possibly even suspension. Doom Pogs. Doom Pogs were awful and awesome all at once. Circular cutouts from old adult magazines, gory grossness from Fangoria, creatively illustrated preteen brilliance like, and the narrator has switched out the words here, F-Master and Miss Alford's hoo-ha. This last word was written in marker over the picture of a cat. These were just some of the devilishly deviant 7th grade wares you could find during emergency bathroom trips during 3rd and 5th period. It was quite a sight. And then, just as quickly as it began, it all came crashing down. Not because of a slip-up by any one student. No, what killed the Doom Pog trade in our school was the sudden bursting in of the vice principal, who had to go number 2 real bad and just couldn't hold it till he got to the teacher's bathroom in the office. And there we were, caught red-handed. I wish I could say it was Madonna's chest glued over top of a yin-yang symbol that did us in that day, but the truth is it was our own hubris and greed. And with that, the great Doompog trade died. Or so they thought. Some girl was in a multi-level marketing scheme and was trying to sell us perfumes. I'd say this was tragic, but maybe school was exactly the right time to fall for crappy pyramid schemes. After graduating, not so much. Sharpened sticks. When we learned about cavemen, we decided that it would be a great idea to create our own prehistoric clan, so we smashed rocks and used them to sharpen tree branches. Some of us were particularly keen on sharpening and started to use walls as grindstones. They were able to sharpen about 6 sticks in half an hour and started exchanging them for berries during recess. When did you realize that your parents were dumb? I was luckily at school working on the newspaper when this happened, but apparently my stepmom was heating oil to make tostadas when it caught fire. My stepmom screamed for my dad and ran over to the sink to grab the hose. Luckily, he stopped her from burning both of them alive, but then decided the best course of action was to pick up the flaming pan and attempt to carry it outside. I walked into a kitchen that smelled like burning oil with giant scorch marks on the floor and black marks up and down the cabinets and walls near our back door. My stepmom has also attempted to argue that Alaska is attached geographically to the United States, and that I was misinformed about what grade levels were in the school I attended. I realized mine was dumb when she joined her second pyramid scheme. She's now on number 4. Oh, my dad went through tons of these as a side business, always hoping he'd make enough to quit his day job. Always ended up stuck with tons of random products that he couldn't get rid of. It was heartbreaking to watch. Then I realized he mostly did it because my mother spends money like crazy and is an insane hoarder. She even has a house, empty for years, that she's too emotional to sell. Meanwhile, my poor dad is shelling out $1,200 a month for that stupid empty house from a job that barely covers all their bills. Both of them should know better. When I found out they never wanted kids, but had them for appearances. Yeah, for the same reason that some people buy a Mercedes or Range Rover. For appearances. When my dad asked me, a 9-year-old, how to spell a simple word, I started paying attention then. I saw how he had a bunch of credit cards, was repaying loans, spent tons of money on cigarettes and dumb crap, never used the stove or oven because he couldn't follow a recipe, so all we ate was TV dinners and ramen noodles. Refused to ever get any government assistance or anything. As I got older, he blamed us for his financial downfall. I started having mental breakdowns over going to McDonald's because he made me feel such massive guilt over it. When I became an adult, I realized it wasn't my fault. I didn't bankrupt my dad. He was just a freaking idiot who blamed his inability to budget or ask for help on his kids. My boyfriend and I were talking about World War II, and his mother interrupted to ask if the leader of Germany at the time was a president of the US. Well, frankly, that level of ignorance is quite impressive. You'd think that being born significantly closer to the events in question, she might be more clued in? When I had a screaming match with my mother that 8/16 is equivalent to 50%. I even drew a bar, divided it into 16 even pieces, and colored in 8 of these pieces. She still didn't believe me. My dad thought a gift card with pictures of cookies on it could only be used to buy cookies. My dad was giving me the birds and the bees conversation when I was about 15. He tells me to don't go around just sleeping with every girl you think is good looking, you'll end up with a kid you didn't expect. Make sure the girl is good for more than a roll in the hay because she won't look that good forever. It was in that moment I knew he was reflecting on his own experiences with my mother. That started a snowball reaction of realization. Fast forward 15 years to just after this conversation took place, and I got curious about my mum, who admittedly I know nothing about. I managed to track her down through one of my half-brothers from one of her later marriages. Turns out there were 7 after my dad, and she can no longer be married in the state I reside in. You can apparently be limited out. So I got some contact information and I reached out to her through social media and later a phone call. Once I actually talked to her in person, it became painfully obvious that she was not well-spoken or educated. I asked her why she had left when I was younger, and rather than answer, she got really angry and started the blame game. Truth be told, I was completely shocked at how rude and quick to anger she was, and by the fact that she wouldn't accept responsibility for her actions. So now I've confirmed what my father alluded to on the good for nothing but a roll in the hay comments, at least in my mind. The problem was, at this point, I'm confused. My dad is pretty intelligent and a down-to-earth kind of guy. Why would he have anything to do with my mother? She was the exact kind of person who'd annoy him any other time. I found my answer in the form of a picture of my mother. My aunt, her sister, shared some photos from that side of the family with me, and objectively, my mother was a very good-looking lady back in the day. I mean, out of my dad's league by a long shot. My parents fell for one of those, "There's a virus on your computer, call Microsoft now," things. They then hailed me as a computer god when I walked in, pulled up a page on my computer to show them it's crap, and told them to get off the phone with the guy immediately. I love them deeply, but they aren't very bright with computer stuff. Oh, my dad did the same thing. He came in and asked about it. I told him it was a scam and to ignore it. He walked right back into his room and paid the guy $350 on his debit card, just to log in and run the standard defrag, cleanup programs. Then they locked him out of his computer and wanted more money to unlock it. We had to toss the laptop in the trash. It was old anyway. I got him a new one. We had to cancel his debit card so they wouldn't just hit his account again. And I had the phone company issue a new IP so that they couldn't contact his new computer. The phone company suggested this move. This man has a master's in mathematics, worked on the guidance system for the Pershing and Tomahawk cruise missiles, and at 84 years old, he's still teaching GED math students at 2 high schools. But the guy falls for every scam. Watching a documentary on dinosaurs about 10 years ago, when my mother enters the room and actually says to me, "You don't actually believe they existed, do you?" I couldn't freaking believe it. My parents took a loan. They thought it was free money. I mean, I knew my parents weren't smart way before this event, but I was watching Bridge of Spies with my mum, and she asked me what the Cold War was. My mother believes that almost anything can be cured with homeopathy, essential oils, and supplements. She distrusts all doctors. She believes that my brother is on the spectrum because he got the MMR vaccine. She might not have vaccinated me and my brother at all if my dad hadn't insisted. I love the woman to death, but I can't talk to her about health stuff. It's infuriating. I had really bad acne my whole teenage years. It wasn't until I was older that I realized my mom was treating my acne with diluted water instead of actual medicine. Could have saved me a whole lot of scars later in life. Mine couldn't admit there was a tiny possibility I might know better than them on literally anything except computers, where I'm apparently a god who knows the ins and outs of every device ever. The latter doesn't bother me as much as the former does. I've literally cited textbooks at her before on subjects that she has absolutely no knowledge in, and she still insists she's right because she's my mother. Both of them used to be analytical and rational people until you put them in front of a PC. Then they became like little children crying all the time. I realized when I was told that the internet would give me cancer because it uses radiation. Growing up, I always had trouble with math. My mum was one of those types that thinks, I'm smart enough that I didn't need school, and cut classes as much as she could. So when I was having trouble making sense of some of my 9th grade algebra, she convinced me that she knew the material and helped me with my homework. I got an F. I stepped on some water in the kitchen and asked my mum, why is there water on the floor? And her response, oh, that's not water, it's melted ice. My dad got me a small carton of milk and a small carton of chocolate milk and said, I didn't know which one you wanted, so I got chocolate and vanilla. My mum and her half of the family are from Kentucky, and they fought with me so much whenever I told them Kentucky wasn't part of the Confederacy. I mean, Kentucky had a sizable group of Confederate sympathizers. I don't know which angle they're coming from. Maybe they had ancestors who were in that segment. What I'm concerned about is whether they're the kind of people who think that the Confederacy were actually the good guys, because God forbid anyone admit their ancestors were on the wrong side of history. It wasn't obvious from a single interaction, but I noticed once I was in school that her response to everything I was interested in was, oh, I don't care about that, or I don't know why anyone would concern themselves with that, and effectively never knew anything about really any topic. If I did ask her what she was interested in, she didn't have anything to say or share that wasn't about spending my dad's money. She didn't work, by the way. She also only judged people based on their wealth and how their house looked when I was dropped off. Again, this is a woman who never had a career. Her parents paid for everything until her second husband, my stepdad, who swooped in and picked up the bill for her life. She could never articulate why it was a potential warning sign to her. She'd just call them names and make it harder for me to leave the house or spend time with my friends. She was unable and unwilling to learn how to explain anything. I'm talking like the simplest things. There were no steps for anything like hygiene or life skills of any kind. If I didn't learn in school or from my grandparents, then I taught myself. She'd get violently angry and belittle me when I didn't know how to do something. She had a horrible temper, so I just stopped bringing home things like report cards. I was on honor roll all the way through school, but she'd take away all of my belongings, anything I liked or enjoyed, so my room would just be empty. If I didn't achieve 90s or higher in every subject, she'd scream at me for being a slacker. I just stopped bringing home the report cards and she never asked or noticed. She had no listening skills whatsoever and an inability to understand that someone outside of her has a different experience and became very upset when that reality was broken. She got all of her news from US or People's Magazine, but I've never seen her read a real book. Oh, also her and my stepdad's hobbies are gambling and drinking excessively. I can sort of understand my stepdad's perspective as he has a super stressful job and isn't dumb, but he has a very low emotional intelligence, so he just represses all of his feelings and then goes wild on gambling. But my mum's life is the opposite of stressful. She gets super into recklessly throwing away money. I made this list because as a child it's really upsetting when this is all you know, and you think something's wrong with you. But your parent can absolutely be a narcissist and also not very smart. It doesn't mean that it's you that's the problem, though.
You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe.
I don't think mine are stupid or anything, but the way they behave in their relationships, they're divorced and both have remarried, makes me realize that they're both flawed humans who don't always think logically. When my mum looked at me with serious conviction and said that the devil is the father of Barack Obama, she said to watch the news at 3 a.m., that's when they tell the truth. Apparently, noodles and rice are health foods. You have to eat a lot of them. I don't know why you're getting chubby. God, I love my mum, but her nutrition theories are horrible. The moment my mum tried to convince me of the following: that saving is always better than investing, always. When traveling out of country, always use traveler's checks and never a credit card. To take your car into the shop for everything, no matter what you think you know. Just don't trust yourself when it comes to anything mechanical. And the moment you disagree with her, you're telling her how to feel and are therefore a misogynistic jerk. Therefore, the only logical conclusion is that you must agree with her on everything. Smoking, therefore, isn't bad for you. Physical well-being has nothing to do with emotional well-being, and my father is wrong about absolutely everything. If you disagree with any of that, you're a sexist. And I think my father isn't smart because he has no backbone and has never once approached my mother regarding her craziness. The vacuum cleaner has been broken forever. My uncle gave us a new one for Christmas, and my mum threw it out because it was green, and she doesn't like green. Every time I tell them we need a new vacuum, she says we don't have the money. But we have the money to go on a trip to Disney World and buy new couches in the past couple of months. Both my parents are idiots when it comes to prioritizing. Also, when it comes to keeping any kind of pet. Dry sand for hermit crabs is unacceptable, and a 5-gallon pot without a filter in the heat of summer is acceptable for a goldfish. Here was probably the biggest indicator. I was 12 or so at the time, and I got dropped off at the bookstore for an afternoon. I was given some money to get something to eat or drink, maybe a book or some Pokemon cards, and enough money to call when I needed a ride. This was pre-cell phone, so I had to use a payphone. Calls were 50 cents at the time. I burned up $3 calling every 10 minutes until my mum answered. It was 4 when I started. About 5 when she finally picked up. "Hello?" "Oh, hey, Mum," I said, feigning that I wasn't annoyed or upset. "I'm ready to get picked up from books." "I just dropped you off." "Mum, that was almost 5 hours ago." "Fine, I'll be right there." In unfavorable traffic, it was maybe a 20-minute drive. 40 minutes later, I called her back. "Hello?" "Hey, Mum, I'm out the door," in the tone of me inconveniencing her. There was a click of the receiver. 40 more minutes go by and I call again. I get the voicemail message, in a clear tone that I was being a bother to her. "Hi everyone, I went to get my son. I'll be back later." My parents always had the same voicemail message, so I was A, confused, and B, had my anxiety get overwhelming as I felt like I was being bothersome to her and whoever may have tried to call. My mother arrived about 15 minutes later, chided me on the ride home for just staying up there and reading books instead of trying to work on bettering myself. After the anxiety swelling had decreased, I came to the conclusion that my mother was implicating that I had to go and make social status improving friends and going to parties, and that the path I was going on wasn't going to lead to a happy or respected lifestyle. I started doing substances a few years later, and even though I quit a long time ago, the effects against my personal life still linger. I also stopped reading as much. I've been trying to get back into that lately. My dad was a janitor his whole life, raising 9 kids. My mum lost a lot of money in multi-level marketing schemes. They both believe in very weird conspiracies and think everything causes cancer. My dad could never figure out computers. I still remember a time he came home furious that work wanted him to take a test on the computer, and he said, "Computers aren't useful at all. I don't see why we don't just stick to pen and paper." There are plenty of stories about my parents' ignorance. I still love them, though. Claiming that the devices that half the people you know work with, and who also probably make more money than you with, are useless, is one hell of a bold claim. My dad is actually a very smart man, but my mother, oh god. Putting aside all of the idiotic parenting things she's done that have messed me up, here are some of the amusing ones. When I was a kid, I was, and still am, absolutely obsessed with animals and books. So I had this book about the classification of animals, and I mentioned to my mum that insects were a kind of animal. She insisted that I was wrong and that I was confused, because I was like 7, so my mum just must know better than me, right? But I'd also been reading about this less than half an hour ago, so I knew insects were animals. I showed her my book, and I think she realized she was wrong, but she was angry she was outsmarted by her first grader. So she said not to believe everything I read and to stop being so disrespectful. Going off the don't believe everything you read thing, she believes everything she reads on Facebook. But when I try to show her a credible source saying I'm right, like when she didn't believe it was legal to fire someone because they're gay in our state, she pulls that line again. She once slept with onions in her socks because Facebook said it would draw out toxins. I grow a lot of succulents and I water them with a spray bottle. And once she said she thought it was cool that she could see that they'd been breathing. I was confused before I realized that she meant the water on the windows behind them. The water from my spray bottle. She tried to tell me that snakes don't have bones. I had a pet snake at the time and had, as I said before, been obsessed with animals all of my life, so I generally know what I'm talking about. I even showed her pictures of snake skeletons and stuff, but she insisted it was fake. She just really hates being wrong, but usually is wrong. I realized my grandfather wasn't very smart, and by extension his daughter, when she relayed to me his wise old story of why black people are bad. My grandfather used to pump gas for a living. This was in the 1910s and 20s, basically right at the start of the Great Migration. That is, blacks leaving the South for better jobs in the North and West. Basically, a lot of white places in the North started getting black neighbors. And he used to complain about the black people picking on him. You see, what the black people would do is pull up to him, have him pump a single gallon of gas, drive around the block, pull up to him and have him pull a single gallon of gas. Apparently this happened constantly, all day, every day, and they were just doing it to waste his time. Just a team of black people saying, let's go mess with this white kid down at the gas station. I heard this story for years as an example that black people weren't to be trusted and why they were shady. And finally, one day it clicked. Grandpa can't tell the difference between one black person and another, so a black person at his pump must be the same one that was there a few minutes ago, and he thinks they're just doing it to mess with him. I pointed out that this was probably the case to my mum. Grandpa was long dead by then, but she still maintains that there was a massive black conspiracy to pay the asking price for gas and make one white teenager do his job. When my mum, a Spanish teacher, pronounced iguana iguana, she also tried to serve us chicken tartare once. The way my father treated his peers. With friends, family, he's nice, but with his employees he was a jerk, with waiters, salesmen, and others too. Mine were fundamental Christians. They thought the earth was 6,000 years old and dinosaurs were a test of the devil. They're not very smart. Mine had me. My mum didn't know that there was a First World War. As a kid, when I asked about it, she said that I mixed up the number. It's World War II, not World War I. And when I followed up with, then why do we put a 2 at the end? She said, because the war was so big we have to multiply it by 2 to accurately describe it. She was dead serious. And just the other day, she told my 3-year-old niece, her grandchild, that all turkeys came from the country Turkey. She wasn't joking. My parents are both smart people. My dad is the manager of a tech support group and my mother is a retired elementary school teacher. What I'd say about them is that they aren't well-rounded and their intelligence is specialized to their profession. It's hard to have a conversation with my father that isn't about work or sports. My mother doesn't want to learn anything new and shuts down when she has to figure out something on her own. You know, there's a difference between intelligence and wisdom. My parents were very book smart. My dad had a PhD in engineering and my mum was an artist. They just didn't always do wise things. My mum married my dad for his financial stability. He was in the Navy at the time, and the man my family wanted her to marry, a family friend, was in medical school. She wanted kids, and from the onset, he said he hated children. After 9 years of marriage, she went off birth control because she was lonely. And my dad has resented me ever since. She did it again 8 years later and had my sister, which my dad forced her to give up for adoption. My dad was a sociopath, pure and simple. He doesn't think he's better than everyone else, he's assured of it. He thinks the rest of us are funny, like we'd think a puppy falling down a flight of stairs because he got scared of his own foot. Funny for their stupidity. He thinks religion is a fraud, profession certificates are a fraud, the medical industry is a fraud, etc. In his mind, he's supreme in his intelligence and left the Navy because he couldn't get promoted. I was told by one of his fellow shipmates he was the Frank Burns of the crew, trying to befriend power and backstabbing anyone else. He was just really bad at it. My dad has no friends, says he doesn't need them, and he job hops every few years, making a crap ton of money as a defense consultant. A really unlikable guy. So yeah, they were smart but not very wise. A final nail in the coffin was when I realized they actually read the articles in the Daily Mail. It took mine at least 4 hours to balance the checkbook together. How about still uses a checkbook as a mark of intelligence?
When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.